Chapter 838. The quality of the elites sent by the superpowers to Beihai was top-notch, but in terms of quantity, there were not many of them. In particular, they only sent the first batch of elites into Beihai. The loss of this group of people would make the superpowers distressed, but it was not a serious blow. 1/3 of the first batch of elites was lost. This loss was not something they could not accept. But at this critical point where the war was about to be launched, the 1/3 loss meant a lot of things. Everyone wanted to be fast. They all wanted to launch a general attack on the Wang family of Beihai as soon as possible. But this 1/3 loss was tantamount to a knife slashing at their vitals. The importance of the first batch of elites from the superpowers to enter Beihai was self-evident. Their combat mission was even secondary. They had to integrate into Beihai as much as possible, gather intelligence, confirm the authenticity of the intelligence, make combat plans, choose assassination targets, retreat plans, and how to use the resources they had obtained to fight for more benefits when they succeeded. The first batch of elites had to have an expectation for everything. At the moment, the superpowers were indeed forming an alliance. But what about after everything in Beihai was settled? If Beihai won, there was no need to say anything. But they believed that Beihai would lose. If North Sea was bound to lose, Zhongzhou would have to take away a large portion of North Sea's huge profits. But even if it was just a small portion, it would be enough to strengthen the foundations of the various superpowers. Moreover, they could cooperate with Zhongzhou now. But after they won, they might dare to become enemies with Zhongzhou. Except for East Island, it might be difficult for other superpowers to take over the territory of Beihai. But on Mount Dibing, there were countless military technologies, pharmaceutical formulas, all kinds of rare resources in the laboratory, and the top talents in countless fields. These could be snatched. The first batch of elites was the beginning, but they had to use everything they had to make a final plan at the very beginning. Now 1/3 of the first batch of elites was lost. The superpowers didn't say anything. Even Jiang Guochu and Yagyu Kurumi, who were their disciples, didn't say anything. In fact, one of the planners was included in the 1/3 loss of each of them. He was one of the core high-level members of the first batch of elites. This kind of person would not be a leader, but he often played the role of a military counselor. He was the kind of person who had a strong overall view and was the best at planning. There were such people in the first batch of elites of the superpowers. But now such a person was killed overnight. Most importantly, due to selfishness, none of the major forces revealed this information. Even now, they still believed that the death of the planner was just a coincidence. No one could imagine that the intelligence of the Samsara Palace was so terrifying. The existence of the planner was very important to the superpowers. But under normal circumstances, such a person would not be deliberately paid attention to by other superpowers. It was more reliable to let them believe that they were the undercover agents of the Samsara Palace than to let them believe that the intelligence of the Samsara Palace was so detailed. However, every faction had lost 1/3 of their forces, which directly proved a fact. After the death of the master of Samsara Palace, and the disappearance of the Samsara Palace, the goddess who had stayed in the Lin clan peacefully was still Li Tianlan's woman after all. And this woman, who had destroyed an era, had finally made her move at the most crucial moment. The loss of the first batch of elites meant many things. The most direct impact right now was that it directly affected the timing of their general attack. They had to allocate manpower to replenish the first batch of elites, and then slowly plan. It would take at least a month or more. Your Highness Wang Xiaoyao, everyone here should be more familiar with Qin Weibai. What do you think of her actions? His Majesty suddenly asked. His words were very euphemistic. But everyone present knew that His Majesty was talking about Wang Xiaoyao's crazy pursuit of Qin Weibai. From the first time Wang Xiaoyao saw Qin Weibai to the time Qin Weibai became Li Tianlan's woman, Wang Xiaoyao had pursued Qin Weibai for many years. Qin Weibai never gave him any chance. But as the King Xiaoyao of the Wang family of Beihai, with this identity, and Qin Weibai was in Zhongzhou state at that time, Wang Xiaoyao had more contact with her and knew more about her. Wang Xiaoyao had a faint smile on his face. After entering this conference room, he seemed to have this expression all the time. He had a faint smile, eccentric, and looked surly and cold. Dominate the overall situation? Hee well, if you also think that she wants to dominate the overall situation. I also think so as not to cause unnecessary misunderstanding. Wang Xiaoyao said lightly. What do you mean, Your Highness? Zhu asked, narrowing his eyes. Wang Xiaoyao ignored him. Everyone seemed to be deep in thought, and did not pay attention to him. His Majesty did not speak, either. The reason why Zhu could sit here was because he was the only invincible realm killer in the Dark World, and because of his strong combat capability. But after all, he was just a new invincible realm killer. Before entering the invincible realm, a thundershocking realm expert, even a top assassin of half-step invincible realm, could not be qualified to sit here. Similarly, he was unlikely to be too deeply involved in some major events. But others were different. The two major sects in East Island. Knights Templars. The Jiang family of South America. These forces were all participants in countless chaotic situations in the past. They had dealt with Qin Weibai more than once, and they had fought against each other more than once. His Majesty said that Qin Weibai wanted to dominate the overall situation, and was ridiculed by Wang Xiaoyao. Even His Majesty could not refute anything. Dominating the overall situation was just a statement that was good for their unity. But in fact, when did Qin Weibai ever dominate the overall situation? What she was best at was setting up a situation with all kinds of chaotic desires, pulling everyone into the quagmire, and guiding the direction of the situation in the early stage of the chaos, intentionally or unintentionally. Such a person was generally not popular in the Dark World. But Qin Weibai was still a goddess. The only goddess. This actually showed that many people did not hate her too much. Hatred might be there, but they did not hate her. It wasn't just because of her outstanding beauty that could cause the downfall of a city. It was also because even if she could control the overall situation, she never tried to lead anything from beginning to end. The whole Samsara Palace was like this. Samsara Palace did not seem to have any ambition to dominate the Dark World. In every major event and every chaotic situation, from the beginning to the end, Samsara Palace had always maintained the most clear goal. When Samsara Palace guided the initial situation to the situation they expected, the whole Samsara Palace would go all out at the first time. After accomplishing the initial goal, they would withdraw from the chaos without hesitation. Even if there were great benefits, they would not fight for it. Yes, because of benefits, greater benefits. Samsara Palace dragged countless superpowers and invincible realm experts into the chaos, and regarded them as pawns that could be used. The superpowers did not mind this. In the Dark World, everyone had the awareness of being a pawn. When Samsara Palace dragged them into the water, it also tossed the whole Dark World into chaos. This could also let the superpowers see the benefits that were so great that they were willing to not withdraw. Then they began to make plans. They schemed against all kinds of opponents and made bigger plans. Then the plot became bigger and bigger. The frictions continued to escalate, and the losses became greater and greater. In the end, they even forgot what their original goal was. Samsara Palace was different. They only had one goal, and there was no so-called greater benefits. The Dark World was turbulent, blood flowed like rivers, and corpses were everywhere. Samsara Palace did not care and did not look at it. What they cared about was the goal that they had set before the chaos. They did not forget their original goal. In this regard, Samsara Palace did not only well, but it was even rational to the extent of restraint. Moreover, in the countless chaos created by Samsara Palace, although it would drag other superpowers into the water, in the chaos, as long as they did not provoke Samsara Palace and their goals, they generally would not take the initiative to provoke others. All the losses of the superpowers were caused by the killing of each other, because they had the necessary benefits. Was Samsara Palace the culprit? For the superpowers that had long adapted to the law of the jungle, the culprit was not anyone, but failure. Only failure. Winner takes all. Failure was the culprit. As long as they won, they could get greater benefits. If they failed, who else could they blame but themselves? More importantly, Samsara Palace seemed to be extremely crazy, but in every chaos, they did things in a very measured way and left some room for others. At least, every time the chaos caused by Samsara Palace, the final winner would not be Samsara Palace. Samsara Palace had made a lot of chaos, neither big nor small, and there were 3 big moves. More than 4 years ago, Master of Samsara Palace destroyed Night Spirit in Europe and got the murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld. She did not move for other interests and directly retreated. In that battle, Dark Knights had the last laugh, completely stabilized their position as the leader of Northern Europe, and even vaguely suppressed the Vatican in Northern Europe. It was a win-win situation. Night Spirit was destroyed. Master of Samsara Palace challenged Gu Xingyun and created the final battle of Heaven Capital. The rise of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was a win-win situation for Samsara Palace and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Li Tianlan came back from the dead and completed his martial arts. Zhongzhou State also put down its guard because of the weakness of East Island. In the final battle of Heaven Capital, Samsara Palace was not the only one who gained something. The chaos in Eastern Europe seemed to be the most tragic. Most of the power of Samsara Palace was used on the Wang family of Beihai. Let Beihai fall into hell forever. The whole of Mormons became an empty city in the absolute domain. Countless elites were buried in foreign lands. The sword that crossed Mormons was so decisive. But even so, in the chaos in Eastern Europe, Samsara Palace made Li Tianlan the biggest beneficiary, and still did not block all the ways for the Wang family of Beihai to take over Snow Country. It was just that Snow Country benefited Wang Xiaoyao in the end. This was Samsara Palace. Samsara Palace was so dedicated to its goal that it did almost everything. Such a force and such a goddess might make other forces feel as if they were facing a formidable enemy. But there were not many feelings of disgust. Because this was the Dark World. His Majesty said that the goddess wanted to dominate the overall situation, which meant that she wanted all forces to stand on the opposite side of Qin Weibai. But after understanding Qin Weibai's behavior pattern, everyone was thinking about whether they could become the second winner in this battle. Because of the goddess's style of doing things, there was always room for leeway, or she was too focused to care about other things. But no matter what, there was always room for leeway. His Majesty squinted at the major forces with their own thoughts, shook his head subconsciously, and suddenly changed the topic. Why did Beihai suddenly attack Zhongzhou State? This is tantamount to a declaration of war, the kind that will not stop until one side is dead. Wang Shengxiao will not be so brainless or irrational. The leaders of the major forces who were thinking were stunned and looked at Wang Qinglei at the same time. His Majesty's question was also the key. If Zhongzhou State did nothing, how could Mount Dibing, which had been enduring, go crazy? Wang Qinglei's face was gloomy, but in the face of these collaborators, he had to give an explanation. Because of the termination plan. His voice was a little hoarse. Hoarse. What is the termination plan? His Majesty was a little puzzled. The Prime Minister personally launched the termination plan. He secretly searched for Wang Yuetong in the entire territory of Zhongzhou State, including Beihai Province, and killed her at all costs. Wang Qinglei said softly. He paused, looked at everyone's changed faces, and had to explain. Because if we guessed correctly, in the negotiation between Wang Shengxiao and Li Tianlan, Wang Yuetong is likely to become the next patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. So the plan didn't succeed, but Wang Shengxiao knew it? His Majesty's tone was relieved, as if he had completely understood. Wang Qinglei did not speak. The result was already obvious. Stupid teammates. Jiang Guochu said with a smile. His voice was soft. It's so stupid. Tianhai Wuji snorted heavily. It does look like this. Wang Qinglei nodded. But have you thought about it? If the termination plan succeeds, how likely is it that Li Tianlan and Beihai will work together? Even if Wang Yuetong is dead, the possibility of their cooperation still exists, but it will be much smaller. But it doesn't matter. The Dark World always talks about results, so this termination plan of Zhongzhou State is really stupid and hopeless. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that I really want to know how your Prime Minister is going to make up for such a serious mistake. It sounds like Zhongzhou State wants to cut off the connection between Li Tianlan and Beihai? Moraid lit a cigarette and said with a smile, but now, if Li Tianlan knows about this, he will be more determined to cooperate with the Wang family of Beihai. It seems that his previous promise to Zhongzhou State can also be torn up, right? Li Tianlan won't know about this. Wang Qinglei said calmly. What? His Majesty was stunned and seemed to think it was a little ridiculous. I mean. Wang Qinglei's eyes swept across the audience, and he said word by word, Li Tianlan won't know about this. Regarding this war, the Prime Minister has obtained the highest authority. At this time, the army of Beijiang has begun to completely block the area within 100 miles of the desert prison. The land and air are all blocked. At the same time, we forcibly shut down all the communication signals of the desert prison. Gu Qianchuan, the first elder of Kunlun City and an expert of the Invincible Realm, will personally go to the desert prison. Now the desert prison is like an isolated island. No one can get close to the desert prison, and no one can leave. No news can be passed in. Everyone's heart trembled. Zhongzhou State's response was so resolute and fierce. Obviously, the Prime Minister had decided to fight, even if it meant offending Li Tianlan to death. Your blockade. His Majesty took a deep breath and said, How long do you think it can be blocked? So be quick. Wang Qinglei said calmly, We must solve Mount Dibbing as soon as possible. At that time, without the help of Mount Dibbing, Li Tianlan will be easy to solve. You can block the desert prison, but can you block Tiannan? Li Tianlan doesn't know about it, but it doesn't mean that Emperor Dong's palace doesn't know about it. Jiang Guochu shook his head. So what if Emperor Dong's palace knows about it? Without Li Tianlan's order, what can they do? And even if they really dare to appear on the battlefield, Emperor Dong's palace without Li Tianlan is nothing to be afraid of. His Majesty nodded subconsciously, and then shook his head. Emperor Dong's palace without Li Tianlan is nothing to be afraid of? Yagyu Kurasumi said indifferently. What did Saint Wei Kunlun say? What did Situt Songyue of Sai City say? What did the Dongqing clan say? These are not the questions you should consider. Wang Qinglei said seriously. Zhongzhou State can guarantee that when the war breaks out, neither Wei Kunlun nor Situt Songyue will appear on the battlefield. As for the Dark Knights of Northern Europe, I can also guarantee that the woman Flaming Fire will not appear on that battlefield. His Majesty took over and said calmly, This was their initial deal. Flaming Fire, Saint, and Hidden God. They could be said to be Li Tianlan's greatest help now. Since the desert prison was blocked, Zhongzhou State could not let anyone close to Li Tianlan participate in the war. Saint and Hidden God would be solved by Zhongzhou State. As for the Dark Knights of Northern Europe, the Vatican and the Jiang family of South America would naturally allocate a part of their strength to contain the Dark Knights in Northern Europe. Wang Qinglei glanced at Zhu and continued, Zhongzhou State will block the desert prison with all its strength and isolate Li Tianlan. Although we have done something wrong, we also have enough compensation, as long as you act fast enough. In addition, Zhongzhou State has decided to launch the termination plan with all its strength. Before the war breaks out, I hope Your Highness can go back to Zhongzhou State with me. No problem. If there is news of Wang Yuetong, I will take action. Zhu laughed in a low voice. But I have a request. Wang Xiaoyao lowered his head. Wang Qinglei took a deep breath and said calmly, Go ahead. After finding Wang Yuetong, let me play with her for a few days. The little princess of the Wang family of Beihai, ha ha ha. A woman of the chosen one. I haven't tasted her yet. And you promised me Tangshi before. Oh, if she can be with Wang Yuetong. Ha ha, ha ha. Rest assured, I will let such a superb woman die in despair. Deal. It seemed that Wang Qinglei did not want to hear him continue. He interrupted his laughter with a straight face and said straightforwardly. His Majesty glanced at Wang Xiaoyao playfully. Wang Xiaoyao lowered his head, picked up the teacup, and took a sip of tea in silence. Chapter 839. The long night was coming to an end. A hazy light shone on the huge field. Neat and clear slogans could be faintly heard from afar, getting further and further away, and finally becoming indistinct. A biting cold wind blew through the morning where day and night intertwined. The scarlet flag in front of the small building fluttered wildly. The old man, whose hair was already white but was still burly and looked extremely fierce, listened to the slogans from afar and stared at the flag in front of him, his expression incomparably solemn. He had been standing here for nearly half an hour, Countless expressions flashed across his face. Hesitation, anger, hesitation, fear, determination, helplessness, doubt. All sorts of emotions. Even though half an hour had already passed, his expression was still constantly changing. Light footsteps sounded behind him. A charming young woman who looked to be around 30 years old walked into the study. She was wearing pajamas, but it was a rare tight-fitting style. It was not as loose and comfortable as normal pajamas, but the tight-fitting pajamas completely outlined her figure. Curvaceous and charming. This was a woman who seemed to be filled with temptation from head to toe. Intentionally or unintentionally, she vividly displayed all kinds of charm. The tall and mighty old man did not notice the young woman coming in. He was still frowning, hesitating about something. "What's wrong?" The young woman spoke softly, a pair of arms hugging the old man's waist from behind, her voice charming and languid. Just now it was a call from the Prime Minister. The old man spoke in a low voice. "Ah!" the young woman exclaimed, her charming face rubbing against the old man's back. She giggled and said, "The Prime Minister personally called you. Is it because you're going to be promoted? To Yuzhou? Or the Southeast?" "Nonsense, you're just thinking about my promotion." The old man turned around and laughed softly, pinching the young woman's face dotingly. The old man stroked the woman's hair, not saying anything. The two of them were not so-called lovers. They were a proper married couple. In the northern borderline, the matter of the northern borderline military commander Huang Tong marrying a mistress had always been a legend in certain hidden circles. Pang Tong was already 56 years old this year. His wife used to be his secretary, and the two had been married for 3 years. 3 years ago, his wife was 25 years old, only 2 years older than Huang Tong's son. Their marriage had caused a lot of rumors. However, after a few years of marriage, the two seemed to be harmonious and sweet. Under the manipulation of some people, the mockery and ridicule had decreased a lot. Commander Huang really loved his wife very much. Thinking about the promotion she had been longing for, he narrowed his eyes and said softly, "But what you said isn't wrong. There is indeed a chance for a promotion." "Where to?" The young woman's eyes sparkled. "Yu Province, Southeast Province, Nanhua Province, or even the military headquarters." The old man subconsciously opened his mouth, then immediately realized that there were some things that he shouldn't say. He shook his head and softly said, "Go back to sleep, I have something to deal with." The young woman blushed and stammered, You don't exercise anymore?" "I'll exercise again tonight." Huang Tong shook his head, put on his military uniform, and began to make a call. The young woman kissed him, then turned and walked out of the study. When she was about to leave the study, Huang Tong's dignified voice sounded from behind. "Ouyang, come to my office right now." The young woman's footsteps paused slightly, then she quickened her pace. From an angle that her husband couldn't see, her eyes were a little flickering. Ouyang. There might be more than one person with the surname Ouyang in the entire Beijiang military region, but there was only one person who was qualified for Huang Tong to call in person. The commander of the 43rd Army of Zhongzhou State stationed in Beijiang, Major General Ouyang Pengfei. He was the well-deserved #1 expert in Beijiang of Zhongzhou State, and also a super soldier personally trained by Zhongzhou State. The young woman looked back at Huang Tong, smiled sweetly, and gently closed the door. Huang Tong wore a military uniform and sat in a chair. Through the window, he looked at the blurry scarlet flag outside, and his face became more and more solemn. Ouyang Pengfei flew fast. His main duty was to lead the 43rd Army of Zhongzhou State, but he still held the position of deputy commander of the Beijiang military region. His residence was not far from Huang Tong's, so they could be said to be neighbors. When he hurried into the study, Huang Tong had completely calmed down. He walked out from behind the desk, sat on the sofa, waved his hand casually and said tiredly, "Sit down." Ouyang Pengfei sat opposite Huang Tong, and was a little confused. "Commander?" "Yes." Huang Tong nodded lightly. The relationship between the two was extremely close, and they were both capable generals of the Prince Group. There was no need for too much courtesy between them. "The Prime Minister just talked to me on the phone. He asked you to come here to give you a message." "Go ahead." Ouyang Pengfei's expression suddenly became serious. A few hours ago, Wang Shengxiao, the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, launched a cleanup operation in Beihai. He personally issued an order that from today on, anyone who enters the border of Beihai without permission will be killed. All foreign combatants and intelligence personnel who don't belong to Beihai or even Mount Dibing are included in the cleanup scope. Before I spoke to the Prime Minister on the phone, 4 major generals of Zhongzhou state had died under Wang Shengxiao's order. Huang Tong said flatly. Ouyang Pengfei raised his eyebrows little by little. Smack. He slammed his palm on the sofa and said furiously, "Bastard! Beihai is the territory of Zhongzhou state. Our general can go anywhere in Zhongzhou state. Who gave him the courage to attack a general of Zhongzhou state? It's just." His voice was trembling with anger. In the end he kept repeating, "Bastard, bastard." 4 major generals were killed in one night. Ouyang Pengfei himself was a major general of Zhongzhou state. Although he didn't know much about the 4 major generals who died in the line of duty, he also felt sorry for them when he heard the news. No matter what, the Wang family of Beihai was just a wealthy family in Zhongzhou state. What kind of behavior was it to publicly kill a general of Zhongzhou state? It's treason. Ouyang Pengfei said angrily. The Wang family of Beihai should be killed. Yes, but things have come to this point. The Prime Minister also made some mistakes. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that everything the Prime Minister has done is for the future of Zhongzhou state. Huang Tong said. Ouyang Pengfei nodded and said in a deep voice, "I understand." Huang Tong glanced at him and hesitated again. Ouyang Pengfei was keenly aware of Huang Tong's hesitation. He smiled and seemed to understand something. "Commander, if there's any military order, just say it. I'll obey any order. Do you need me to go to Beihai to fight? I have no problem." He was a top superior of the half-step invincible realm cultivated by Zhongzhou state. His real strength might not reach the level of the invincible realm, but it wasn't weak either. If they wanted to target Beihai, an expert like him would definitely be called up. Ouyang Pengfei's eyes were calm and fearless. "Aren't you afraid of death?" Huang Tong also laughed. "Of course I am, but it's not a reason for me to retreat." Ouyang Pengfei said with a smile, "I volunteer to fight. I hope Commander will allow me to go to Beihai to fight." "No." Huang Tong shook his head. "Your mission is not in Beihai, but here." "Here?" Ouyang Pengfei frowned. "Beihai is crucial, but so is Li Tianlan," Huang Tong said. Ouyang Pengfei's face gradually changed and he looked a little stiff. The possibility of Li Tianlan cooperating with Beihai is very high, which is what Zhongzhou state doesn't want to see. If we can destroy the cooperation between them, it's the best, but if we can't, Huang Tong took a deep look at Ouyang Pengfei. Anyway, Li Tianlan can't appear on the battlefield now, and he can't even leave the prison. Ouyang Pengfei's smile disappeared, and it was almost invisible. His eyes were a little evasive. "So, the Prime Minister's order for you is to lead all the members of the 43rd Division to block everything around the desert prison at all costs. No one is allowed to enter or leave. The Beijiang military region will transfer elites to fully cooperate with your blockade operation." Huang Tong looked at Ouyang Pengfei's eyes and said word by word. Ouyang Pengfei couldn't laugh at all. Block the desert prison. Block Li Tianlan. This task was like a huge stone. His heart continued to sink, so much so that he almost couldn't breathe. "This is against Emperor Dong's palace and the one in the prison?" Ouyang Pengfei's face was a little pale. Huang Tong didn't speak. His face was also a little pale. They were not afraid to offend the Wang family of Beihai at this time. But they really didn't want to offend Li Tianlan. Against the Wang family of Beihai, that was the action of Zhongzhou state. Countless forces were involved. They were mixed and inconspicuous. Moreover, the Wang family of Beihai was more disciplined, so they would be relatively safe. But against Li Tianlan, they were in Beijiang. No. There would be a second force. Carrying out Chen Fangqing's order meant that they were the only force against Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was not the Wang family of Beihai. He gave Zhongzhou state the impression that he was extremely crazy. Whether it was fighting against external forces or internal forces, he was extremely crazy and ruthless. The two tragedies of the Tang family and the Qi family in Yuzhou had fully explained what would happen if they angered Li Tianlan. At this time, in the face of this order, both Ouyang Pengfei and Huang Tong were a little scared. They really didn't dare to do it. But they had to do it. Huang Tong was very clear that Chen Fangqing had taken the lead in all the actions against the Wang family of Beihai. And in the shortest time, he got the support of most of the forces of the Prince Group. The Prince Group didn't have a good impression of the Southeast Group and the Wang family of Beihai. If there was a chance, they would not be polite. This was like a big gamble. The Prince Group thought they had enough chips and confidence to sit on the gambling table. Chen Fangqing might be thinking about the future of Zhongzhou State. But many people were also thinking about the future of the Prince Group. It was foreseeable that once the Wang family of Beihai was really defeated, even if the Southeast Group didn't fall apart, its vitality would be greatly damaged, and it would become the weakest group today. This meant unimaginable benefits and right to speak. At that time, Chen Fangqing and the Prince Group, as the leaders of everything, would be rich and crazy. This kind of harvest was enough to make them the first group in Zhongzhou State, or even the only group. At present, targeting Beihai and blocking Li Tianlan was the will of the entire Prince Group. Huang Tong and Ouyang Pengfei couldn't refuse at all. Even if they didn't want to do it, they had to obey the order. They were all senior officers of Zhongzhou State. Disobedience was equivalent to desertion. The result would not be better than offending Li Tianlan. Pengfei, I know you're in a difficult position. To be honest, I'm the same. Huang Tong said softly. But we have no choice. Ouyang Pengfei smiled bitterly and didn't know what to say. Execute it. Huang Tong handed him a cigarette, sighed and said softly, as long as the blockade is successful, my position will be yours in the future. And I'm sure that this position will not be your end. The Prince Group also knew that blocking Li Tianlan would put Huang Tong and Ouyang Pengfei in a difficult position, so they promised huge benefits. As long as the blockade was successful, in a short time, the two would definitely be promoted. And this was not the end, just the beginning. Of course the position of commander is good, but you have to be alive to sit in this position. Ouyang Pengfei said bitterly. What you said makes sense, but don't forget, this is the will of the whole group. You can give up this position, but you don't have the courage to block Li Tianlan. Do you have the courage to fight against the whole group? Ouyang Pengfei was silent for a long time, and then said softly, how long do I need to block the prison? The fastest is 1 month, the slowest is 3 months. Huang Tong took a drag on the cigarette. There should be a clear result in this period of time. Ouyang Pengfei scratched his hair irritably. What about the military area? Commander, how many people can you give me? This time, Huang Tong didn't hesitate at all and said directly, you can take as many people as you need. All members of the 43rd Army will take action. In addition, you can name everything in the Beijiang military region, and I will cooperate. I only have one request. Completely block the desert prison. No one is allowed to enter or leave. Pengfei, remember this is a war. We can only win, not lose. Ouyang Pengfei was silent for a long time, and then asked, what if someone breaks in? People from the Wang family of Beihai, or people from Emperor Dong's palace? Huang Tong looked at him expressionlessly, and repeated again, remember, this is a war. At the same time he said this, outside the study, in the master bedroom not far from him, the charming young woman took off her pajamas, lay on the bed again, and took out her mobile phone. She hid under the quilt, composed a text message with a calm expression, and then completely deleted her edited text message. There was a desert in Beijiang. There were also snow mountains. The flying snow fell in Kunlun City. In Kunlun City, Gu Xingyun picked up his mobile phone, looked at the text message sent on the mobile phone, and narrowed his eyes. Huang Tong made an appointment with Ouyang Pengfei. It seems that he has made up his mind. What choice does he have? Gu Qianchuan sat opposite to Gu Xingyun and shook his head. He really has no choice. Gu Xingyun held the mobile phone and looked at Gu Qianchuan thoughtfully. But you have. What are you going to choose? Chapter 840. Gu Qianchuan sat opposite Gu Xingyun. In the past 2 years he had lost a lot of weight. His hair had turned white, and one of his sleeves was fluttering in the wind. He looked old and miserable. Gu Xingyun's days of recuperation might not be miserable, but they were definitely not easy. Even though he was also an expert of the invincible realm, as Gu Xingyun fell silent, Gu Qianchuan still faced unimaginable pressure. Li Shi was gone in Kunlun City. Gu Xingyun slept most of the time. Under the endless pressure, Gu Qianchuan already had the idea that he might not be able to support Kunlun City. His ambition gradually converged, so his relationship with Gu Xingyun became much more harmonious. Hearing Gu Xingyun's words, Gu Qianchuan looked up at him and smiled strangely. I can choose? What can I choose? Do nothing but wait for death. Gu Xingyun lowered his head and rubbed the teacup in his hand. After a while he shook his head and said, Things are not that bad. That can only be said that you underestimated the thoughts of Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing. Gu Qianchuan said unceremoniously. The relationship between them became stable again, and their words were no longer polite to each other. He grabbed a cigarette with his only arm, flicked his fingers, lit the cigarette, and said, How is your injury? It's not difficult to recover, but it will take time. Gu Xingyun said quietly. How long? To what extent can it be recovered? Gu Qianchuan stared at Gu Xingyun's eyes seriously. Gu Xingyun lowered his head, took a sip of tea, and narrowed his eyes slightly. No one knew how much he had gained during this period of recuperation. Even he did not know. Before he was injured, he was only close to the peak of the invincible realm. Now the only thing that Gu Xingyun could be sure of was that if he recovered from his injury, he could at least set foot in the domain of the peak of the invincible realm. As for how far he could go, he did not know. But at least he frowned and smiled. Far better than before. What about time? Gu Qianchuan asked lightly. Gu Xingyun subconsciously touched the position of his heart, and a gloomy look flashed in his eyes. He was lucky not to die when he was not at the peak of the invincible realm, and suffered the full blow of the murderous weapon-setting sun at a close distance. Even after nearly 2 years, his injury still needed time to recover slowly. He thought of Situ Tsangyue. At that time in Linen, the woman almost completely aimed the setting sun at his chest and fired. Sooner or later, he would make her pay a painful price. It's not important, Gu Xingyun said lightly. I do need some time, but so does Li Tianlan. He can't be faster than me. Even Li Tianlan a year ago. With the 13th floor, he wouldn't be much weaker than you at your peak. Gu Qianchuan shook his head and mocked. If not, how could Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing have the idea of letting him replace Kunlun City? The muscles on Gu Xingyun's face twitched fiercely, but he didn't speak. Let Emperor Dong's palace replace Kunlun City, and let Li Tianlan become the new god of war of Zhongzhou State. This was the real idea of Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing. If Li Tianlan refused to cooperate with the Wang family of Beihai, this idea might have become a reality that was being implemented now. This idea was hidden, but the Special Warfare Group was one of the 6 groups anyway. As the leaders of the Special Warfare Group, how could Gu Qianchuan and Gu Xingyun not hear any news? Up to now, Kunlun City's complaints about the president and the prime minister aside, at least they and Li Tianlan had really formed a relationship that could not coexist. Kunlun City could not allow a person who could replace itself at any time to appear. With the development of Li Tianlan's Emperor Dong's palace, it was impossible to let go of Kunlun City, a huge obstacle. Coupled with the grudges of the past, both sides had become enemies that would not rest until one of them was dead. So when Chen Fangqing wanted to block the desert prison, the first place he thought of was Kunlun City. At his current age, this is his limit. Gu Xingyun's voice was cold. In a short time, he can't even break through the real invincible realm, let alone the peak of the invincible realm. His physical quality in his early 20s can't bear the power of the peak of the invincible realm. At his age, it's a little difficult for him to practice the thunder-shocking scripture. Li Tianlan himself must be very clear about this. His physical quality is far from the peak state. It's a pipe dream for him to enter the invincible realm in 3 to 5 years. His words were very confident. This was not only the confidence that Li Tianlan could not enter the invincible realm in 3 to 5 years. Similarly, he was sure that his injury could be completely recovered in 3 to 5 years. So you have a choice. There's no need to fight with your life now. You're not waiting for death. You're now the acting governor of Kunlun City, so you can completely refuse Chen Fangqing's request. If you really want to deal with the situation, just send a few people to the desert to guard. Gu Xingyun said slowly. Seeing Wang Shengxiao's strength at the risk of fighting and Li Tianlan's domineering way of killing people at will, Gu Xingyun's thinking was slowly changing with the increasingly arrogant style of the younger generation. When he recovered from his injury, he would be at the peak of the invincible realm, just as Li Tianlan once boasted. On that day, Kunlun City was the overall situation of Zhongzhou State. At that time, he would be the first to find Li Tianlan and kill Li Tianlan at all costs and in spite of all obstacles. At worst, he would go to the desert prison for a few years. When he came out, Kunlun City would still be Kunlun City. Gu Qianchuan's face was cold. There was a flash of hesitation in his eyes. Then he shook his head and said in a low voice, I'm not as generous as you. I've been like this since I was a child. I only know that we're helping the parliament now. It's the general trend. We have the advantage. If we don't seize this opportunity, we're rejecting the parliament. If you can't suppress Li Tianlan in the future, the parliament won't help us. Gu Xingyan looked at Gu Qianchuan silently. There was an emotion of understanding in his eyes. So you've made up your mind? Is the news of Silver Phoenix reliable? Gu Qianchuan asked. Of course. Gu Qianchuan nodded. She's an elite of Phoenix Pavilion. It won't be a problem for her to control Huang Tong. To be honest, with Silver Phoenix's condition, if Huang Tong hadn't been in Beijiang, he wouldn't have gotten Silver Phoenix at all. But now it's different. If the action of blocking the desert is successful, Huang Tong will at least be a member of parliament in the future. In this way we won't treat Silver Phoenix badly. In that case, I'll guard the desert with the 13th Army. Gu Qianchuan touched his empty sleeves and thought of the young man who cut off his arm. A haze flashed through his eyes. He didn't want to let go of this opportunity. It was a win-win situation for the parliament in Kunlun City to block Li Tianlan with the power of Zhongzhou State. Moreover, he was not at ease with Gu Xingyun. No one could be sure that Gu Xingyun could really suppress Li Tianlan in the future. It would be best if he could kill Li Tianlan with the help of this incident. It was not impossible, because this was a war. Take a few more people there. Gu Xingyun glanced at him and said quietly, If you meet Li Tianlan, be careful. Be careful means retreat if you can. Now you should not be his opponent. Gu Qianchuan sneered. That was me 2 years ago. You can make progress. Even if I lose an arm, I can't stay in the same place all the time. Gu Xingyun nodded, picked up the teacup, and said, Have a nice trip. Gu Qianchuan did not speak. His figure moved and disappeared in front of Gu Xingyun in an instant. Gu Xingyun sat alone in his yard, holding a teacup and watching the wind and snow dancing in the sky. The darkness gradually began to dissipate. Gu Xingyun finished the tea in the cup and put it down. A slight and light footstep appeared in his perception and gradually approached his yard. Gu Xingyun was stunned. A warm smile vaguely appeared at the corner of his mouth, and he sat back again. No one knocked on the door. The gate of the yard was gently pushed open from the outside. A girl in a long skirt came in. There seemed to be a fog in the yard. It was as light as sand. It was a kind of hazy and ethereal aura. Ethereal, smart, dreamy and cold. The whole yard seemed to be in a trance with the appearance of the girl. Some people's bodies seemed to truly have immortal energy. At a glance, it was as if they didn't belong to the mortal world, not eating the food of the mortal world. She wasn't arrogant, she was calm and quiet, but it was as if she was always standing outside the mortal world, cold, quiet and perfect. Gu Xingyun quietly looked at the perfect girl who was like a fairy. His eyes were full of love, like a father seeing his own daughter. Teacher. The girl came to Gu Xingyun and bowed slightly. Silly girl, how many times have I said that when there is no one around, you can call me foster father. You can call me father directly. Gu Xingyun reached out and touched the girl's head. He said softly, Why do you get up so early today? I'm meditating. The girl did not avoid Gu Xingyun's hand, but she was not close to him. Of course, she was not alienated either. It seemed that she was born to be cold. She looked only 14 or 15 years old, but her every move was with an indescribable calmness. If there is anything you don't understand, tell me. Gu Xingyan laughed, and his eyes became softer. Without Li Shi in Kunlun City, he seemed to have intentionally or unintentionally let go of Li Qingcheng. Instead, he was particularly fond of this girl who had just come to the mountain for less than 2 years. He taught her the martial arts of Kunlun City, without reservation. Compared with Li Qingcheng, the girl enjoyed the real princess treatment in Kunlun City. It's okay, the girl said quietly. She looked at Gu Xingyan with her ethereal and dreamy eyes, and said softly, "Teacher, why did Second Master suddenly go out of the city?" "Second Master has something to deal with. I'm injured, so I can only trouble him." The girl said yes. Looking at the falling snow in front of her, she was lost in thought. Her eyes were clear, but there was a yearning in the depths of her eyes. Gu Xingyan's heart moved slightly, and he smiled softly. "Xianyan, do you also want to go out of the city and have a look?" The darkness was about to dissipate. In the morning light with falling snow, the girl named Gu Xianyan lowered her head and said softly, "I don't know." "After you go out of the city, where do you want to go and what do you want to do?" Gu Xingyan continued to ask. Gu Xianyan still shook her head and said softly, "I don't know." "Well," Gu Xingyan pondered and smiled. "Not knowing is a good thing, but also not a good thing. Since you don't know, you might as well go out and have a look. Maybe you will know what you want to do." He flicked the girl's white forehead and smiled. "After dawn, I will arrange someone to send you out. No one will stop you if you want to do anything. But you can't get tired of the people who protect you. You are the princess of Kunlun City. It's not proper to have no one following you. Do you understand?" A little joy flashed on the girl's delicate face, and she nodded hard. She looked at the gloomy sky above Kunlun City and whispered, "Teacher, it's dawn." Gu Xingyan looked at her expression and could not help laughing. He touched the teacup and whispered, "Yes, it's dawn." When it was dawn, Gu Qianchuan officially left Kunlun City. In the courtyard of Beijiang Military Region, Ouyang Pengfei left Huangtong's office. The 43rd Army near the desert began to assemble quickly. This morning, in Kunlun City, which seemed to have been forgotten by many people, Gu Xingyan took Gu Xianyan's small hand and told her many times. He supported his unhealed body and sent her out of Kunlun City step by step. Chapter 841. The morning sun rose in the desert. The night passed completely. The 43rd Corps of Zhongzhou State directly took a shortcut into the desert when the sky just lit up. The 43rd Corps was not as famous as the Border Control Corps, but no matter how strong the Border Control Corps was, it was impossible to suppress the edge of all the other armies in Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State had millions of soldiers. Even if the 600,000 soldiers were not included in the Corps, it was still not difficult to find some battle-worthy troops. The 43rd Corps was a rapid response force stationed in Beijiang all year round. Many times, the problems it dealt with were equally sensitive. Even in the entire Zhongzhou State, the 43rd Corps could be said to be one of the elite armies with the most combat effectiveness. Whether in terms of personnel quality or military equipment, it could be regarded as a real ace. The most important thing was that the 43rd Corps was probably the most experienced army in the entire Zhongzhou State when it came to fighting in the desert environment. The 43rd Corps was the primary candidate to block the desert prison. The helicopter hovered over the desert. A large number of armored vehicles and main battle tanks advanced in a straight line in the desert. The military transport vehicles that had been specially modified to adapt to the desert environment moved majestically. The sun shone on the vast expanse of yellow sand. The army of nearly 20,000 people advanced continuously, bringing with them an indomitable aura of iron and blood. Ouyang Pengfei looked down at this scene, and suddenly felt that it was a little tragic. Huangtong had decided to completely execute the Prime Minister's order and block the desert prison at all costs. So his 43rd Corps was just a vanguard. Within 8 hours, at least 2 heavy armored corps suitable for desert combat would form a second blockade along the road of the 43rd Corps. This time, Huangtong almost mobilized more than half of the strength of the Beijiang military region. In order to block the area within 100 miles around the prison, The Beijiang military region dispatched at least 100,000 people. The mobilization of 100,000 people, just thinking about the huge logistics transportation was enough to let people know Huang Tong's determination. At the same time, it could also be seen that they were serious and afraid of this battle. There was nothing to fear in the desert prison. But no one dared to ignore Li Tianlan. Similarly, no one could ignore the giant group around Li Tianlan. If this was a war, the blood would be shed in the desert. But at this moment, the top management of Zhongzhou State, the Academy, the Southeast, the Crown Prince, and the 4 groups of wealthy families were also fighting. Li Tianlan was already in the teeth of the storm. Ouyang Pengfei, on the other hand, was pushed to this position. He was the vanguard in this war. If he won, he would naturally work hard and make great contributions. But what if he failed? He would probably be smashed to pieces. It couldn't quell the anger of Li Tianlan and the giant group. Ouyang Pengfei shuddered. In fact, he had never met Li Tianlan, at least not face to face. However, he had a good personal relationship with Qi Mulan. Every time he thought of Li Tianlan, he would think of the miserable end of the Qi family. And the person who had caused the tragedy of the Qi family had unconsciously become a shadow in his heart. He really didn't want to provoke Li Tianlan, but standing in this position he had no choice. No, perhaps there was still a choice. His only choice was to go all out and lock down the desert prison. Only success was allowed. Failure was not allowed. Ouyang Pengfei looked down at the military map in the cabin. On the map was the terrain of the desert with a radius of 100 miles. It was a stretch of yellow sand that was extremely flat. It was so simple and boring that it looked like a forbidden land. However, at this time, this land of danger was divided into countless pieces, marked with different colors on the map, and marked with numbers. Although this map, which had been hastily made, was crude, it was extremely effective in this kind of simple terrain. At present, our goal is the 4th zone. It's about 70 miles away from the desert prison, which is the most suitable blockade area. If we want to further narrow down the blockade area, we can advance about 3 kilometers in the 4th zone, which is the limit. Beside Ouyang Pengfei, the chief of staff of the 43rd Army stared at the map in front of him and said slowly, "How many kilometers can we advance without considering the third eye and the heavenly arrow?" Ouyang Pengfei looked at the map in front of him and said calmly, "General, we have no choice but to consider the third eye and the heavenly arrow. Even if Li Tianlan dares to attack us, he may not dare to use the Sky Arrow base. But the Eye of the Sky is a fully automatic military base with a killing range of 60 miles. Once the Eye of the Sky is fully opened, no one who enters this area can survive. Don't doubt Li Tianlan's courage. Although I haven't met him, many people say that he is a madman. Once we enter the killing range of the Eye of the Sky, it's impossible for him to not attack. In a fully automatic military base, he can easily explain that there is a code error or some other reason. No matter how ridiculous it is, as long as he says it, people will be willing to believe it." The chief of staff shook his head and said, "I know what you mean, but Zhongzhou State has frozen most of the commands of the Third Eye in advance. Li Tianlan can't use the Third Eye system." Ouyang Pengfei said, "If it can be frozen, it can be turned on." The chief of staff hesitated and said in a low voice, "General, don't forget who the current standing minister of the army headquarters is. His authority is enough for him to turn on all the frozen weapon systems. Similarly, he has enough strength to do this. The Dongqing clan is the richest family in the Zhongzhou state military. Who knows how many chess pieces they have in the military? Well, even if Dongqing Wudi doesn't do it, what kind of place is the desert prison? The most dangerous criminals are imprisoned there. No one can be sure whether there are cutting-edge super hackers there. If Zhongzhou State can freeze the system, maybe the desert prison can be unlocked. To say the least, if Dongqing Wudi restarts the system, it will be explained to the public that it's the dying struggle of the prisoners in the prison. Li Tianlan killed them and handed them over. This is an explanation, but our brothers who sacrificed themselves died in vain." Ouyang Pengfei gritted his teeth and said nothing. "We have to confirm one thing. Zhongzhou State has no intention to kill Li Tianlan, even the parliament. It's not a matter of whether they want to kill him or not, but whether they can kill him or not. Taking action against Beihai is always the most important thing. But neither the president nor the prime minister can be crazy enough to start a war with the Southeast group and the Prince group at the same time. So the blockade this time is just to limit Li Tianlan. At least I haven't received an order to limit the supplies of the desert prison so far. The chief of staff said softly. So if I'm right, the parliament will make a big move against Beihai in the near future. It won't take too long, so we won't blockade the desert for too long. When the matter in Beihai is over, the parliament will have a talk with Li Tianlan, and he hesitated and didn't speak for a while. Go on. Ouyang Pingfei said quietly. We might as well wait and see. The chief of staff said calmly. Wait and see? Ouyang Pingfei smiled bitterly. We are at the forefront of this conflict. How can we wait and see? We are indeed very far ahead at present, but it's not a bad thing. At least if someone wants to rush in from the outside, they will first face the troops behind us. As for the direction of the desert prison, I don't know what happened to make the prime minister give such an order, but Li Tianlan won't know it at night. For a while, he shouldn't respond too violently. Even if he does take action, there are still people in front of us who can shelter us. The chief of staff smiled and said softly, His Highness Gu Qianchuan should be coming, right? Chapter 842. About the fairy face in Kunlun City. Wasn't it written in Volume 4, Chapter 41? Xian Xuanzi took it from Mormons. The 43rd Army was moving. The Beihai Corps was also moving. From beginning to end, the desert prison remained silent. Beihai Province also remained silent. Hence, when news of the movements of the North Sea Legion and the 43rd Division reached the central continent, the first people to panic weren't the people in the desert prison or the North Sea Province. Instead, the first people to panic were the leaders in the central continent's upper echelons. This year, tomorrow was destined to be the most sensitive time. It happened once every 10 years, like reincarnation. These leaders had long been used to such changes, but as the situation developed, some conflicts became more and more intense. Until the 43rd Army began to blockade the desert prison, some immovable big shots in the upper echelons of Zhongzhou State were shocked to find that the whole situation had developed to the point of life and death. The end of this term was the beginning of the next term. The transfer of power from the old to the new was related to the fate of Beihai Province and the future of Emperor Dong's palace. It was no exaggeration to say that the change of power, Beihai, and Emperor Dong's palace had been closely linked because it involved the Southeast, the Crown Prince, the Academy, and the Giant Group. Among the 6 groups in Zhongzhou State, the 4 strongest groups were involved and became the 2 sides of the game. The Beihai Group and the Special Warfare Group also had their own space to move. All the people in Zhongzhou State who were qualified to participate in this matter had already participated. Everyone had different pursuits, but the results they hoped for were the same. Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing might be thinking about the future of Zhongzhou State, but more people were thinking about the possible benefits in the future. The game of Beihai was the key before the change of power. If Beihai won, the Academy and the Prince Group would naturally lose a lot of strength. If Beihai lost in the next 10 years, their power would shrink again until they completely disappeared in Zhongzhou State. Many people were silently participating and silently observing the aggressiveness of the Prince Group and the academics, observing the compromise and retreat of the Southeast Group and the Prince Group quietly. Almost everyone who didn't know the inside story thought that the situation had formed a delicate balance. But the balance was completely broken overnight. The Beihai Corps searched the entire province. The 43rd Army directly blockaded the desert prison. If it was a game before, then, right now such a direct and forceful style was almost equivalent to a war. The War of Zhongzhou State. In the hundreds of years since the founding of the country, there had been countless changes of power in Zhongzhou State, but there had never been a war. What about this time? As the actions of Zhongzhou State and Beihai became more and more intense, the entire Zhongzhou State began to get nervous. In the office of the executive minister of the army headquarters building, Dongqing Wudi smoked silently, squinting at a report from the Beijiang military region in his hand. The report was very short, and the content was even simpler. It said that the 43rd Division had joined forces with 2 other heavy armored divisions to conduct a large-scale exercise. Dongqing Wudi did not look at this kind of serious nonsense. He mainly looked at a signature below. It was Li Huaqing's personal signature. The president of Zhongzhou State had always been the minister of the army headquarters, but most of the time it was just a nominal title. The executive minister presided over the daily work of the army headquarters. Reports like the one in the northern borderline were usually transmitted to the executive minister first, and then continued to be reported. But this time it was the complete opposite. Without Dongqing Wudi's knowledge, the report from Beijiang had fallen into Li Huaqing's hands. After Li Huaqing signed it, the report came to the army headquarters. In other words, Li Huaqing agreed to this maneuver. Under such circumstances, Dongqing Wudi's opinion was no longer important. When the president had clearly expressed his opinion, even if he had a different opinion, he could not say it, otherwise he would be immature. Therefore, he frowned slightly and raised the document in his hand several times, but finally put it on the table helplessly. This document is a little interesting. Yi Dongqing picked up the document, glanced at it, and said with a smile. Dongqing Wudi glanced at him, shook his head, and said nothing. At present, the president's attitude seems to be a little vague. Yi Dongqing looked down at the signature on the document, and suddenly said, "In the general direction, his position will not change, but the prime minister is a little irrational now. He can even be said to be crazy. Naturally, the president will not accompany him to the end." Dongqing Wudi said blandly. Although Li Huaqing still signed his name on the document, the news that the president and the prime minister appeared in Dragon Lake Park at the same time last night also came out. All kinds of signs showed that the cooperation between the president and the prime minister had cracked. But no matter what, at this time, Li Huaqing would still support Qin Fangqing. The situation is in our favor, Yi Dongqing said with certainty. Dongqing Wudi snorted softly and said with some dissatisfaction, "We still need some evidence. We just arrested him last night. Even if we interrogate him, it will take some time." Yi Dongqing spread his hands helplessly. "But don't worry, we will get what we should get soon. When the evidence is put in front of the president, what do you think his attitude will be?" Li Huaqing knew that Qin Fangqing had started the termination plan. The Wang family of Beihai also knew. But now there was no evidence that could directly prove that the termination plan was Qin Fangqing's doing. Sometimes evidence was important, and sometimes it was not at all. When the strength of the two sides was almost equal, as long as they found the evidence that Qin Fangqing started the termination plan, with the power of the Wang family of Beihai and Dongqing Wudi, it was enough to give Qin Fangqing a heavy blow, and even push Li Huaqing away from Qin Fangqing completely. Now the elites of Zhongzhou State under the control of Mount Dibing were the key to providing evidence. "Tianlan." Dongqing Wudi was silent for a moment and said softly, "He has been in the desert prison for too long. Even if you have the so-called evidence, the president's attitude on the blockade of the prison will not change. He and Qin Fangqing are estranged just because Qin Fangqing's means are too fierce, which is not in line with his principles of life. He doesn't want to take risks with Qin Fangqing. This doesn't mean that the president doesn't want to take over Beihai. The evidence you have may bring a lot of pressure to Qin Fangqing, but the president and the prime minister will not let go of the blockade of the prison. They both want to take over Beihai, and don't want to see Tianlan cooperate with Beihai. So in any case, they will not let anyone send the news to the prison. It doesn't matter." Yi Dongqing smiled. "Comparatively speaking, what matters is His Highness's current identity. His Highness went to the desert prison mainly because of Qi Mulin's case. As long as Qi Mulin is proven guilty of treason, His Highness is innocent." "So what?" Dongqing Wudi said with some mockery. "If he is proven innocent, will Tianlan be released directly at this time? If that's the case, what's the point of blockading the desert prison? I mean, as long as His Highness is proven innocent, His Highness can do a lot of things. We will break through the blockade as soon as possible and reveal the termination plan to His Highness. The whole Beihai province is looking forward to the day when His Highness breaks through the blockade." Chapter 843. The prisoners in the desert prison were still calm. Without any information channels, they had no way of knowing what was happening in the outside world. However, the higher-ups of the prison were on high alert. The conference room that was used by Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing as a negotiation venue was filled with people. Xiao Mahai, a few deputy wardens, the commanding officer of Sky Arrow Air Force Base, the chief of staff, a few middle-level managers of the prison were gathered together. Although there was no panic, the atmosphere in the conference room was extremely heavy. Everyone. In the heavy atmosphere, the commanding officer of Sky Arrow Air Force Base, Kong Zhe, slowly said, 5 hours ago, the Parliament unilaterally shut down all the control systems of Sky Eye Base. At the same time, they shut down the radar and positioning system of Sky Arrow Air Force Base. Most of the military equipment in the two bases are paralyzed. In this situation, if there is a serious criminal escaping, the Sky Eye Base will not be able to lock onto any target. Without the radar and positioning system, it will be difficult for Sky Arrow Air Force Base to send air forces to fight. We don't have a clear route. In the entire base, only a few top pilots can continue to operate the fighter jets. However, they can only take off and land. We can't even lock onto the target. The Parliament hasn't given any orders to the base. It's only unilateral, but it has completely paralyzed our combat power. From now on, the two military bases near the desert prison have zero combat power. We need everyone to protect the safety of the prison from now on. 4 hours ago, our logistics personnel were detained in the northern military region. Although some daily supplies were sent over, they were all sent over by the elites of the 43rd Division. As for our people, we've lost contact with them. The head of logistics had a gloomy expression. Although the prison still has power, all external communication signals have been completely blocked. We can't get in touch with the outside world. Phones, internet, everything is in a state of disrepair. 2 of the prison staff were supposed to take a leave to visit their families. However, before they could leave the prison, they were sent back at gunpoint by the people of the 43rd Division. A deputy warden slammed the table and gritted his teeth. What are the people of the 43rd Division trying to do? They said that they were conducting a military exercise, so they temporarily blocked all access to the prison. Major General Kong Zhe sneered. His eyes were full of mockery. Then what's the point of blocking communication signals? The short-tempered deputy warden snorted coldly. They only blocked all our exit and entry routes. As for the signal jamming, they said it had nothing to do with them. Kong Zhe shook his head and couldn't help but look at Xiao Mahai, who was sitting in the main seat. Warden, what should we do now? Wait, Xiao Mahai said lightly. Everyone looked at each other. The current situation was obviously very abnormal. Wait, how long do I have to wait? There's no need to think about it. These things are all directed at us. To be precise, they are directed at His Highness. This is a blockade. No matter what the other party says, this matter is actually a blockade of the desert prison. Xiao Mahai said slowly. When Li Tianlan was not around, he was no longer the civil servant. He looked calm and composed. He glanced at the middle-level officer in charge of logistics, narrowed his eyes and said softly, "Are the test results out?" "It's out. All the supplies sent by the 43rd Division are in line with our purchase list. They've all been tested. Normal, no poison." The logistics supervisor nodded. Xiao Mahai nodded. What about the ingredients for His Highness? All tested. Normal, no poison. The eyes of the logistics supervisor were calm and relaxed. Xiao Mahai took a deep look at him and suddenly said with a self-deprecating smile. At present, it seems that the Parliament obviously doesn't intend to poison or starve us. Our supplies are not cut off, no poison, but we can't have any form of contact with the outside world. That is to say, the Parliament just wants us to stay here quietly. No one spoke. Everyone was looking at Xiao Mahai. There are 2 possibilities. First, the Parliament doesn't want His Highness to leave the prison, or doesn't want His Highness to leave the prison now. But this blockade won't last long. The cost of using tens of thousands of troops to blockade a place is too high. Using this means shows the Parliament's determination and attitude that they don't want a long-term blockade. Second, The Parliament doesn't want His Highness to know something happened in the outside world. I don't know what it is, but it should be very important to His Highness. Similarly, tens of thousands of troops can't blockade here for a long time. So this matter is only important to His Highness now. Or they think that after a period of time, even if His Highness knows about it, it won't affect them. We don't have to think too highly of ourselves. If His Highness isn't here, the Parliament won't target the desert prison with such great fanfare. Everyone's face was still solemn. Xiao Mahai was the warden here. It was such a tough job. Before Xiao Mahai came here, he was the commander of a group army in Zhongzhou State. After he came here, those who were sent here were naturally his trusted subordinates. For example, Air Force Base Commander Kong Zhe used to be the chief of staff of Xiao Mahai's group army. Other deputy wardens and middle-level cadres were also Xiao Mahai's trusted subordinates. Xiao Mahai had long been labeled as a member of the giant group. It could be said that he was the person closest to Li Tianlan. Now such a thing suddenly happened in the outside world. This showed that the situation outside had reached the most sensitive time. No one knew what was being blocked this time. But if the blockade was successful, Li Tianlan was destined to stay in the desert prison for the rest of his life, and they would not have a good end either. If the blockade failed, Xiao Mahai would have a meteoric rise, and all of them would also have a very good future. Everyone was nervous and a little excited. "Commander, give the order." Kong Zhe suddenly stood up, looked at Xiao Mahai, and said in a deep voice. At this moment, he subconsciously used the title he used in the group army. Xiao Mahai took a deep look at him and laughed. "I don't know what they are blocking, or they don't want His Highness to leave. But I'm sure that if this is a war and the 43rd Army is the enemy, the more they don't want us to do something, the more we have to try to do it. If they want to block His Highness, we will make a way for him. We will open a path for His Highness. If they want to suppress the news, we must know what they are suppressing." Xiao Mahai stood up and said calmly, "I'm going to try the strength of the blockade of the 43rd Army." Everyone stood up all of a sudden. Was Xiao Mahai going to break out of the blockade alone and see outside? "Commander." A deputy warden was silent for a while and said carefully, "Although we can't see His Highness now, should we tell Madam about this?" Xiao Mahai looked down at his watch and shook his head. "Madam is still resting, no." The door of the conference room. It was suddenly pushed open. Xiao Qing, who was like a beautiful scenery in the prison, trotted in and shouted, "Dad, Madam wants you to go to her now." Xiao Mahai's body stopped, and then he turned and walked out of the conference room without hesitation. Everyone in the conference room looked at each other, and finally sat down. Xiao Mahai came to Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai's dormitory as fast as he could. After getting up, Qin Weibai, who was neatly dressed, had already had breakfast. She was sitting in a chair and flipping through a thick notebook in her hand. "Madam." Xiao Mahai's voice was respectful, and he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. "What happened?" Qin Weibai glanced at him and said quietly, "The internet suddenly can't be used." "Not only the internet." Xiao Mahai smiled bitterly. "All the communication equipment can't be used. The 43rd Army blocked all the passages to and from the prison at the same time. At present, the desert prison has been completely isolated. We can't contact the outside world, and the outside world can't contact us either." Qin Weibai's hand that was flipping through the notebook suddenly stopped, and she was silent for a long time. Something happened to Yuetong. After a long time she said slowly, "Either the Wang family of Beihai knows about Yuetong, or..." She shook her head slightly and said in a slightly heavier voice, "What a fool." Xiao Mahai thought that Qin Weibai was scolding him, so he bent down subconsciously and whispered, "Yes, yes, madam, I'm going to." "What are you going to do?" Qin Weibai glanced at him. "I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the person who plans to deal with Yuetong." "What a fool." Xiao Mahai thought of the negotiation between Li Tianlan and Wang Shengxiao some time ago, and vaguely seemed to understand something. If the blockade of the desert prison was to prevent His Highness from cooperating with the Wang family of Beihai, then who personally ordered the blockade of the prison? The president? Or the prime minister? Xiao Mahai was a little nervous, but then he became determined. "What are you thinking about?" Qin Weibai asked calmly. Madam, their blockade is too hasty. We don't know what's going on outside, and we don't know the specific reason why they suddenly blockade the prison. This is too passive. I think we should take advantage of the time when their blockade is not strict to break out. At least we can get some information. Xiao Mahai whispered. I want to go and have a look. Qin Weibai raised her head, looked at Xiao Mahai seriously, and asked, Do you know the consequences of doing this? Xiao Mahai was stunned and said blankly, I haven't thought about it. Once you fail to break out, you will be 100% accused of treason, and then you may not come back. Qin Weibai said lightly. Xiao Mahai was silent for a long time, and then said sullenly, At least it's better than doing nothing. Qin Weibai lowered her head, looked at the notebook in her hand, and said softly, It's okay. Xiao Mahai narrowed his eyes and did not speak. Qin Weibai did not speak either. Her eyes were fixed on the page of the notebook, on the last paragraph of the page. In October of the same year, Jiang Qiansong and his brothers died in South Africa, and the legend of Qin disappeared. In February of the next year, the East Emperor's guards came out and killed 3 invincible realm experts, shocking the world. The guards stood in front of the East Emperor Palace for 2 years, accompanied them day and night, and finally died in Beihai, the first and only guard of the East Emperor Palace. His code name is Ruthless. Chapter 844. Xiao Mahai waited for a long time. Qin Weibai didn't say anything. The prison seemed to be facing a formidable enemy, and the whole Zhongzhou state was nervous. It seemed to end with her words. Xiao Mahai thought about it many times, but he couldn't figure out what it meant. Did it mean that nothing would happen to the prison? Or that nothing would happen to the outside world? Or was it something else? Xiao Mahai wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He was actually a little afraid of Qin Weibai, or not exactly afraid. But in front of her, he always had a kind of uneasiness that he couldn't describe. Qin Weibai was not an easy person to get along with. She and Li Tianlan both looked very quiet. But Li Tianlan was purely quiet. And Qin Weibai's silence had a kind of indescribable indifference and arrogance. No matter where she was, what she did, and what posture she had a kind of unattainable calmness and coldness. This kind of sharpness that was enough to make most people shrink back might only be restrained when she was around Li Tianlan. When Xiao Mahai was alone with her, his posture was even more respectful than when he was with Li Tianlan. Do what you have to do. Qin Weibai turned a page of the notebook. She didn't look up, but said quietly, Okay. Xiao Mahai nodded and turned to leave. He didn't react until he was out of the door. What he had to do? Serving Li Tianlan was his biggest responsibility. But he hadn't seen Li Tianlan for nearly 2 months. Li Tianlan was now raising his sword. The area where he raised his sword had been completely regarded as a forbidden area of the prison. Qin Weibai personally sent his 3 meals every day. What else should he do? Xiao Mahai shook his head fiercely. His mind was a little confused. He walked back to the conference room in a daze, sat in his seat, and didn't speak for a while. Everyone in the conference room was looking at him with concern. No one here knew Qin Weibai, but almost everyone had heard of the legend of this goddess. Compared to them, and even compared to Li Tianlan, she was the one who truly stood at the top. Whether it was before or now, everyone wanted to hear the goddess's opinion on the current situation. Corps Commander. Kongzhe waited for a while and finally couldn't help but call out. Xiao Mahai's voice was a little erratic. What did Madam say? Kongzhe was a little nervous. Madam. Xiao Mahai hesitated for a moment and smiled bitterly. Madam said it's fine. She asked me to do what I should do. Kongzhe was stunned and asked subconsciously. Then what do you want to do? Xiao Mahai's mind went silent for a moment. He immediately understood. Qin Weibai asked him to do what he should do. At a time like this, what he should do wasn't important. What was important was what he wanted to do. Before he went to see Qin Weibai, he decided to break through the blockade outside the prison by himself. That was what he should be doing right now. Xiao Mahai suddenly stood up. Kongzhe was startled. She looked at him cautiously. What's the situation outside? Xiao Mahai asked in a deep voice. An hour ago, in addition to the 43rd Army, the Beijiang military region also used 2 heavy armored regiments. At present, more than half of the military strength has appeared near the prison, and the number has exceeded 40,000. In addition, Gu Qianchuan, the acting governor of Kunlun City, appeared in the station of the 43rd Army. It seems that the Beijiang military region intends to completely block us at all costs. According to their actions, it is estimated that in another 8 hours, the desert prison will become a real isolated island. At that time, even a fly can't fly out. Kongze took a deep breath and said in a gloomy tone, all the communication within the prison had failed. The message could only be transmitted by the most primitive means. The station area of the 43rd Army was 60 miles away from the prison, which was the front line. The people they sent out must be close to the front line, then run back to report the news, and then run back again back and forth. The news, he said, was the latest situation that came an hour ago. Gu Qianchuan. 40,000 people. 8 hours. Xiao Mahai narrowed his eyes tightly and muttered to himself. Corps commander, I'll kill our way out with you. The deputy warden, who was in charge of interrogations, stood up and said resolutely, you're right. He had always been hot-tempered. Seeing that Xiao Mahai wanted to break out, he didn't bother to consider any consequences and directly showed his attitude. Nonsense. Kongze glared at him. At this time, there is no possibility of success to break out. Tens of thousands of people gathered in such a small place in the desert. There are countless detection instruments, a large number of advanced military equipment, and experts of the invincible realm. It's impossible to break out. We have to do it even if it's impossible, Xiao Mahai said. Kongze froze for a moment. This time, the blockade is aimed at Your Highness and Emperor Dong's palace. It's not appropriate for Your Highness to show up for the time being. But it doesn't mean that Emperor Dong's palace doesn't need to show its attitude in the face of the army of Zhongzhou state. This kind of attitude can only be expressed by me, Xiao Mahai said calmly. I'm the director of Emperor Dong's palace. The army has sealed us. If I don't show up, should I let Madam take the risk? His Highness and his wife built the current Emperor Dong's palace together. We have all kinds of reputations in the outside world, but we never shrink back. We are cowards who bully the weak and fear the strong. We don't have such a reputation now, and we can't have it in the future. But Kongze was a little annoyed. But it's Zhongzhou state that seals us. Zhongzhou state, Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan. No one would think that the three were not one. Toughness, madness, and overbearingness were all external. But Zhongzhou state was still one of them. Yes, it's Zhongzhou state that seals us, Xiao Mahai said meaningfully. Kongze froze and took a deep look at Xiao Mahai. At this moment, no one could understand Xiao Mahai's meaning except for him. From this moment on, the most bitter lieutenant general in Zhongzhou state seemed to have completely unloaded all his identities in Zhongzhou state and completely stood in the position of the director of Emperor Dong's palace. Corps commander, we can't be sure of His Highness's attitude. Kongze became serious and said slowly, I can be sure. Xiao Mahai smiled and whispered, I remember when His Highness was in Eastern Europe 2 years ago. He once said something to Sword Emperor. Kongze was a little confused. At that time, Li Tianlan was still the youngest marshal in Zhongzhou state. His every move and every word was the focus of attention. Many sensitive topics would also be recorded, but they could only be viewed with certain authority. After all, Xiao Mahai was a lieutenant general, and he had enough authority. The words and deeds of some people that needed his authority to see were often sensitive. Maybe many years later, a certain person or a certain sentence would appear in the history of Zhongzhou state. What is it? Kongze asked. Xiao Mahai took a deep breath. A tiny but incomparably sharp electric arc curled around his body, faintly discernible. He had not fought with others for many years, but he was forcibly recovering. His body was straight, and his fighting intent was rising little by little. In the subtle light of the arc, he looked extremely determined. If Zhongzhou state doesn't let me down, I won't let Zhongzhou state down. Xiao Mahai said lightly, whether it's His Highness or Emperor Dong's palace, or even everyone, it should be the same. Li Tianlan said this in Eastern Europe, but until now, no one had asked Li Tianlan what would happen if Zhongzhou state failed him. Why? What was sacred, lofty, worthy of love, and worthy of everything in everyone's eyes would not be let down. So this question was meaningless. When that day came, there were only choices. Just like Xiao Mahai's choice now. It represented the choice of Emperor Dong's palace. Outside the prison, the morning sun rose high in the sky. Under the scorching sun, thousands of miles of yellow sand could be seen. An incomparably dazzling lightning rushed out of the gate of the desert prison and rushed to the front line 60 miles away. It moved forward with indomitable will. Chapter 845. Qin Weibai stood in front of the window, quietly watching the bolt of lightning that rushed out of the prison gate disappear from sight. Then countless people in the prison were busy. A few technicians went to the Sky Eye base, trying to restart the weapon system there. This fully automatic weapon system was set up in the desert, so the firepower was extremely violent. Even an expert at the peak of the invincible realm couldn't survive such dense firepower. As long as they broke through the remote blockade of Zhongzhou state and reactivated the system, they at least had a bargaining chip with the 43rd Army. Kong Zhe returned to the Sky Eye base, planning to restore the combat effectiveness of the Air Force as much as possible in the most primitive way. The others were still in the conference room, discussing how to deal with the current situation. In any case, everyone in the prison was already on the same boat with Li Tianlan. If Li Tianlan didn't come out for the time being, they had to do their best to try to solve the current problem. Qin Weibai turned back to the table and poured herself a glass of water. Her perfect and delicate face looked quiet and soft, without any tension or solemnity. The army was gathering dozens of miles away. The blockade had been fully spread out in the desert. But it was just a blockade. What Chen Fangqing wanted most was Beihai. At this time he couldn't kill Li Tianlan. He couldn't kill him and he didn't dare to. Killing Li Tianlan and destroying Beihai meant a full-scale war in Zhongzhou state. That was a real war. If Li Tianlan died in Chen Fangqing's hands, Dongqing Wudi would definitely have the courage, reason and strength to launch a real war. Naturally, the Southeast group would not sit still. At that time, the whole Zhongzhou state would be in war, with corpses everywhere and blood flowing like rivers. Zhongzhou state's international status would plummet. Even if Chen Fangqing was really crazy, he wouldn't take such a risk. So even if he knew that the giant group was cooperating with the Southeast group, their main target was still the Southeast group, so that Dongqing Wudi wouldn't be completely stimulated. Chen Fangqing didn't dare to hurt Li Tianlan. He knew that, and so did Qin Weibai. So now he could only completely block the desert prison, and then concentrate on Beihai. In this way, the possibility of Chen Fangqing blocking the prison was easy to speculate. Either Chen Fangqing made up his mind to wipe out Beihai once and for all, or something happened in the outside world that would make Li Tianlan cooperate with Beihai. The former was unlikely because there was not enough time. The latter could only be because of Wang Yuetong. Chen Fangqing tried his best to prevent the news about Wang Yuetong from being passed to Beihai prison. That was why tens of thousands of soldiers had marched over, cut off communications, and cut off the base's weapon systems. However, Qin Weibai still felt that Chen Fangqing was very stupid. From her position, she would not look up to the leader of a country. Chen Fangqing's actions this time were really stupid. Or rather, it could be said that his mentality was unbalanced and he didn't consider it thoroughly. He might not know many things, but at the very least, he should know that she was the clan leader of the Lin clan now, and they were locked in prison together. Could it be that the other party had really disregarded everything? Qin Weibai took a sip of water in silence, and took the flower that Li Tianlan had given her from her hair. The flower formed by the sword qi was vivid and translucent, but it looked lifeless. More than a month ago, Li Tianlan's sword energy had completely died down. He cut off all contact with the outside world. Even though Qin Weibai sent him 3 meals a day, she always left them at the door. Not to mention seeing Li Tianlan, most of the time, the food she sent to him was brought back untouched. No one knew how Li Tianlan was doing now. Li Tianlan's room was now like a black hole, and no one dared to go in. Qin Weibai silently observed the flower in her hand. At the core of the flower, there was still a trace of sword intent that was so subtle that it almost didn't exist flowing, so it stabilized the shape of the flower. However, this trace of sword intent could not allow Qin Weibai to communicate with Li Tianlan at all. Even she did not know how Li Tianlan was raising the sword. She did not understand martial arts, and she did not even know what raising the sword was. So she had been flipping through the notebook in her hand these days, trying to find some clues from it. Today, she just turned to the page of ruthlessness. It happened to be when Xiao Mahai came in to find her. The blue notebook was extremely heavy, and the content was detailed and cumbersome. It was not the experience of martial arts or weekly notes, but all her memories that were sleeping in Switzerland. The Samsara Palace's detailed and somewhat strange intelligence system was often built on the basis of these memories from the past or the future. Time could not change the affection, but the old memories would eventually fade. Therefore, she had recorded some important information in her notebook a long time ago. So the content of the notebook was varied. Some were like stories, some were like narratives, and some were like specific words, which looked extremely messy. Qin Weibai's eyes fell on the sentence about ruthlessness. The guard stood in front of the East Emperor Palace for 2 years, accompanying him day and night. For 2 years he accompanied him day and night, standing in front of the palace. Qin Weibai looked at it for a long time. She thought about it, found a pen in the room, hesitated for a while, and finally finished the story. No one's memory was omniscient and omnipotent. She still had things she did not know. For example, Qin Weibai only knew things after she became the patriarch of the Lin clan. The East Emperor in the notebook was invincible and unparalleled in the world. In that era that belonged to him, no one was qualified to be his personal guard. So he only had one guard, codename Ruthless. Qin Weibai calmly wrote 3 lines of small words in the notebook. Beihai Wuyo. Xianyuan Wuyo. The East Emperor Ruthless. The story was complete. She put the notebook away, opened the door, and slowly walked out of the prison gate. The scorching sun shone in the desert, which seemed to reflect the light. The whole world was extremely bright. Qin Weibai, wearing a white casual shirt and white wide-legged pants, walked in the yellow sand. Her clothes fluttered, and her fragrance filled the air, like a fairy descending to earth. Qin Weibai walked forward quietly. She walked in a straight line for about 10 miles. The sun was hot, and a fine layer of sweat appeared on her forehead. She raised her hand to wipe the sweat, and gently picked the sword energy flower Li Tianlan gave her. Her black hair fluttered with the white clothes. Qin Weibai squatted down, inserted the flower in her hand into the yellow sand under her feet, and whispered, "When will you come?" When noon was approaching, the helicopter from Yuzhou flew over Xianyuan City, and finally landed slowly in front of the City Hall building of Xianyuan City. This was the youngest city in Tiannan, but it had a completely different atmosphere from the other cities. There were flower beds, fountains, clean and tidy stone roads, and green grass. People were coming and going in front of the City Hall, but there was a faint sense of order. Overall, there was not the slightest bit of noise. Instead, it was somewhat quiet. Ning Qianqing's back was to the white building of the City Hall. Watching the helicopter land, he walked a few steps quickly and smiled softly. "Welcome to Xianyuan City, Marshal Yi." Yi Dongsheng, who walked out of the helicopter, shook hands with Ning Qianqing warmly. He glanced around and laughed heartily. "Xianyuan City is beautiful. Mayor Ning, you're young and promising." "You flatter me, Marshal Yi," Ning Qianqing asked calmly. "Do you think I should eat first or report to you first?" "There's no need to report." Yi Dongsheng waved his hand. "There is a tacit understanding between Xianyuan City and the parliament. This tacit understanding will not change in the past, and will not change in the future. I came here on a whim and wanted to take a look, and tell you a piece of news by the way." Ning Qianqing glanced at him and nodded. "In that case, get in my car. Let's go back and talk. I've already informed Beitian. Let's have a small meeting." "Not here." Yi Dongsheng glanced at the beautiful city hall with a playful look. "Not here. Let's go back to the headquarters." Ning Qianqing shook his head. He had just had a morning meeting with the chief judge of Xianyuan City and the relevant personnel here. Xianyuan City was on the right track, but the law was still being perfected. Tiannan was a chaotic place where wars and conflicts never stopped. Under such circumstances, the rapidly developing Xianyuan city had become the target of settlement for almost everyone in Tiannan. The population of Xianyuan city had been increasing. As of last month, the population of Xianyuan city had exceeded 600,000. In addition, they received a steady stream of settlement applications every day. Under such circumstances, a set of effective and clear legal provisions was what Xianyuan city needed most, because it represented the real order on the surface. Yi Dongxing took a deep look at Ning Qianqing and said nothing. He followed Ning Qianqing into the black Volkswagen parked in front of the city hall. The headquarters that Ning Qianqing mentioned was, of course, the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace. The headquarters was built on the edge of Xianyuan city. It was originally a large farm. After the renovation, it had been brand new. The main building of the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace was a 6-story castle. It was steady and heavy, and looked extremely majestic. The Volkswagen kept bumping on the road. Yi Dongxing looked at the mountain-like castle in front of him and nodded with a smile. Not bad. The road condition is a little bad. Ning Qianqing smiled. Some time ago, the city held a meeting and approved the second phase of the expansion plan of Emperor Dong's palace. The area of Emperor Dong's palace will be expanded from the original 300 acres to 750 acres. The project is not small. Many nearby buildings will be demolished, and the road condition also needs to be improved. The area we are now in is basically a large construction site. It will be much better if we go forward. Yi Dongxing nodded and suddenly asked, "What's the construction period?" 16 months. Ning Qianqing said quietly, "It's neither fast nor slow. Xianyuan city has plenty of time and a bright future, so I'm not in a hurry. My only requirement is the overall image and quality." After 16 months, the second phase of the expansion of Emperor Dong's palace will be expanded. If everything goes well, we will launch the third phase of the expansion plan, which will cover more than 2,000 acres. In terms of municipal administration, the 8th phase of the expansion of Emperor Dong's palace has been planned, which is expected to take 5 to 8 years. At that time, the entire Xianyuan city will be included in Emperor Dong's palace and be integrated with it. At that time, Tiannan may be the Tiannan province. Yi Dongxing nodded and said thoughtfully, "The new city plan." Ning Qianqing nodded. "If you need help, just let me know." Yi Dongxing smiled. "Not for the time being." Ning Qianqing was also smiling. In fact, people in Zhongzhou State contact me every day, wanting to develop projects in Xianyuan City. In this regard, I have set up a city construction department. We welcome foreign investment, but only if it is in line with the urban construction and future plan of Xianyuan City, the scale of Emperor Dong's palace, environmental protection, transportation, industrial chain, etc. Xianyuan City has just started, so everything is just a rough idea. We can't focus on the present, but on the long term. We have to consider what will happen decades or even centuries later. Emperor Dong's palace won't fall. What we do today should be a fortune in the future instead of a burden for future generations. Specifically speaking, whether it's Emperor Dong's palace or me, what we want is very simple, and that's order. Ning Qianqing's voice was steady and clear, but there was a kind of indescribable spirit between the lines. Yi Dongxing looked at him quietly, feeling a little emotional. Li Tianlan chose Ning Qianqing to be the mayor of Xianyuan City, which was the best choice. This year, Ning Qianqing was 28 years old, and it had been 5 years since he met Li Tianlan. At the age of 27, Li Beitian was now an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. With the Nirvana sword, he really reached the peak of combat effectiveness. His martial arts progress was rapid, and now he was one of the top experts in Emperor Dong's palace. Yi Huayu, who had been following Li Beitian closely, also entered the thunder-shocking realm a few months ago. And Yu Qingyan, who was the closest to Ning Qianqing and had promised to marry him when Li Tianlan came out, was only one step away from the thunder-shocking realm. Ning Qianqing was still at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. His martial arts progress was not great, and it could even be said that it was just passable. But as the mayor of Xianyuan City, He did better than countless domestic senior officials at the same level. This year, Ning Qiancheng, who was 28 years old, was 10 years younger than Zhou Yuanshan, who was 38 years old. There was only one level difference between them. Maybe many years later, he would become the core spokesperson of Li Tianlan in Zhongzhou State, supporting a new group to move forward in Zhongzhou State and on the international stage. Just like him and Wang Tianzong. Or more than that. Ning Qiancheng calmly introduced the plan of Emperor Dong's palace in Xianyuan City to Yi Dongsheng. The car passed the bumpy construction site, and everything in front of them suddenly opened up. The castle was getting closer and closer, looking more and more majestic. The black Volkswagen stopped on the lawn in front of Emperor Dong's palace. A man who looked about 30 years old opened the door for Yi Dongsheng and said with a smile, "General Yi, welcome to Emperor Dong's palace." Yi Dongsheng glanced at him. As one of the members of Zhongzhou State who paid the most attention to the development of Emperor Dong's palace, a series of information about him immediately appeared in his mind. Fairy tale, is everyone here? Ning Qiancheng asked casually. Yes, Beitian just talked to Minister Dongcheng on the phone. Everyone who can come is here. The man smiled, and his voice was calm. Fairy tale was not his code name, but his real name. He could be said to be the youngest high-level official in Emperor Dong's palace. The so-called young referred to the time when he became a high-level official. Fairy tale himself was also one of the graduates of the two academies in the previous batch. He graduated from the Deep Sea Academy and ranked very high in the Deep Sea Academy. During the final maneuver of the two academies, his team was broken up by Jiang Shangyu's 3000 World. In the end, he could only participate in the individual maneuver. After the final maneuver, he, who had a lot of invitations in hand, finally applied to join Emperor Dong's palace, and came to Tiannan with the first batch of elites of the two academies. He officially entered the thunder-shocking realm half a year ago. After many inspections of him and his family, Emperor Dong's palace decided to upgrade his authority. Fairy tale was the youngest high-level official, but among the high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace, he was relatively old. Moreover, he was very steady and capable. At present, he looked like a chief steward in Emperor Dong's palace, responsible for the daily operation of Emperor Dong's palace. Strictly speaking, he took over the position of Wang Yuetong. However, Li Tianlan had not returned to Emperor Dong's palace, so now the power distribution inside Emperor Dong's palace was vague. Fairy tale did not have a clear position. Not only him, but even Li Beitian did not have a clear position. However, the fact that he could participate in the core meeting of Emperor Dong's palace was enough to show his identity and importance. Yi Dongsheng shook hands with Fairy tale seriously and sighed. Emperor Dong's palace in Xianyuan City was developing all the time. Fairy tale was one of the typical examples. His family was not a wealthy family in Liaodong, Zhongzhou State, but it had a strong local influence. Fairy tale's father was the mayor of a city in Liaodong, but he did not have a clear mark of a group. After Fairy tale entered Emperor Dong's palace, his whole family immediately adjusted their pace of development. The whole Tong family was absolutely in line with Bai Qingqian, the speaker of Liaodong. At present, Fairy tale's father had been recommended as a member of the provincial government of Liaodong. There were rumors that he would be elected as the mayor of the capital of Liaodong, and his rank had reached the level of deputy governor. Although the level of deputy governor was not very high, after Bai Qingqian left Liaodong, Fairy tale's father would definitely take on more important positions. There was no doubt that the whole Tong family would become Li Tianlan's power in the future. They might even become the spokesperson of Li Tianlan's new group in Liaodong. There were many people like the Tong family. Emperor Dong's palace recruited thousands of graduates of the two academies at one time. The saying that the poor learned literature, and the rich learned martial arts was still applicable now. Those who could enter the ice-condensing realm, or even the fire-flaming realm at a young age generally needed a lot of resources. A large number of graduates had their own families, big or small. Their individual influence was minimal, but together they were a huge force. The new city plan, the expansion of Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan's prestige, and the order in Tiannan became clearer and clearer. Step by step, countless families, big and small, were completely integrated. Countless families approached Emperor Dong's palace with the help of their families who worked there. These small and medium-sized forces, which were originally looked down upon by other big forces, were like fish in water under the influence of Emperor Dong's palace. Emperor Dong's palace was also expanding its influence in various regions of Zhongzhou state with the help of these small and medium-sized families. This win-win situation could not be destroyed. The small and medium-sized families needed to unite around Emperor Dong's palace. Emperor Dong's palace also needed this kind of unity to further strengthen itself. Emperor Dong's palace spread its tentacles to countless places in Zhongzhou state with the help of these small and medium-sized families. These tentacles might be very weak, but the huge shadow of the giant group had covered them. Countless follow-up personnel were constantly adjusted and resources were redistributed. This was a situation that a rising superpower would inevitably encounter in the process of its rise. Fairy tales were a typical example. A young force like Emperor Dong's palace was filled with young people everywhere. No one could say for sure if the unknown young man and the unknown family behind him would eventually reach the real peak and become the main component of a superforce. Most importantly, next year, this year's graduates of the two academies would graduate again. Emperor Dong's palace and Xianyuan city, which were just starting to be vigorous, were the forces that many students wanted to join. In this sensitive period, if everything went well, Li Tianlan's position in Zhongzhou state would become more important. If there were no accidents, most of this year's graduates and valuable elites would be recruited by Emperor Dong's palace. This kind of explosive development was enough to make everyone tremble in fear. Yi Dongsheng walked into the castle thoughtfully. The inside of the castle was huge and magnificent. The castle had 6 floors and thousands of rooms. The main body of Emperor Dong's palace was running effectively inside. Yi Dongsheng quietly watched the people coming and going in front of him. He could even clearly feel the rigor and efficiency. That's it for now. The follow-up needs a lot of improvement. It looks a little messy. Sorry to embarrass myself in front of you, Commander Yi. Ning Qianqing said with a smile. There was some pride in his eyes. Today, he could be said to be the most popular mayor in the whole Zhongzhou state. But in his heart, he preferred to regard himself as a member of Emperor Dong's palace. The future of everyone here was related to him. And his future was related to everyone here. Yi Dongsheng quietly watched everything in front of him. After a long time he took a deep breath and said softly, "Respectable and formidable." Ning Qianqing smiled and said no more. He led the way into the elevator. The elevator went straight to the 6th floor. Outside the door was a large and simple conference room. All the senior members of Emperor Dong's palace who could come were sitting here. The atmosphere was silent and depressing. Yi Dongsheng glanced around and found many famous people in the whole Zhongzhou state, and even the whole dark world. Li Beitian didn't need to say much. Among the 4 famous swords of Mount Shu, Li Beitian often mocked himself by saying that his great void sword was really weak in the early stage. After entering the thunder-shocking realm, Li Beitian's great void sword intent became more elusive and unpredictable, and his sword energy was treacherous. It could completely match an expert of the half-step invincible realm. Among the young people of Zhongzhou state, the most dazzling were undoubtedly Li Tianlan and Wang Shengshao. The second was the low-key and unpredictable Jiang Shangyu. The third was Li Beitian. Gu Hanshan, the young master of Kunlun city, seemed to be completely silent after the maneuver of the 2 academies. Li Beitian had become a typical example of a latecomer catching up. The potential he showed made everyone look forward to it. Many people even asserted that his future achievements would surpass Wei Kunlun, the first senior brother of Mount Shu. He could even keep up with Li Tianlan and move forward with Li Tianlan. Sitting next to Li Beitian was Lin Yuxian, the commander of the Nightmare Army. He was the only high-level official with a clear position in Emperor Dong's palace, a real major general specially approved by Zhongzhou state. Currently, the main military forces of Emperor Dong's palace were 2 small troops. The Nightmare Army was one of them, and it was also the sharpest sword of Emperor Dong's palace. It was mainly responsible for external battles. The situation in Tiannan was complicated. The Burning Legion, the Purgatory of Heaven capital, and various other forces were mixed together. and there was constant friction. The Nightmare Army was the main fighting force. Xianyuan City had been established for more than a year, and now the Nightmare Army, which had less than 2,000 people, had made outstanding military achievements. Few people could be sure of what Lin Yuxian was thinking. According to the rules of the Lin clan, from the moment he entered Emperor Dong's palace, he had withdrawn from the direct line of the Lin clan, given up his identity as the heir, and formed a branch of his own. Yi Dongxing had vaguely heard some rumors. It was said that Lin Yuxian's Nightmare Army was just a starting point, and it was also a team lent to him by Li Tianlan. Li Honghe died, and Li Guangtu was neither close nor distant. Li Tianlan's Emperor Dong's palace was destined to be Emperor Dong's palace. Therefore, the heir of the Lin clan planned to rebuild Zhuanyuantai of Zhongzhou State with Li Tianlan's full support. Therefore, the cooperation between the two was unbreakable. If this rumor was true, Kunlun City would definitely make an extremely fierce reaction. But Lin Yuxian was also not to be trifled with. Although he rarely fought, many facts had proven that in terms of martial arts, he was even stronger than Li Beitian. If such a figure wanted to rebuild Zhuanyuantai, even if he was so low-key that he almost had no sense of existence, his every move was also a figure that could provoke Kunlun City and even Zhongzhou State. Beside Lin Yuxian sat a little giant who was mighty but looked very simple and honest. With a height of more than 2 meters, he was majestic and broad, and his every move seemed to carry explosive power. When he saw Yi Dongxing's eyes sweeping over, his thick arm moved as if he wanted to raise his hand to salute, but in the end he put his arm back. Yi Dongxing narrowed his eyes and smiled without saying anything. This giant was the leader of another army in Xianyuan City. In addition to the Nightmare Army, there was another army in Emperor Dong's palace called the Praetorian Guard. The Nightmare Army was responsible for external combat, and the Praetorian Guard was responsible for internal defense. The commander of the Praetorian Guard was Jade Pool's first disciple, Su Chu, a real powerhouse. Now he was also at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, but in terms of strength alone he could completely crush most of the half-step invincible realm experts. In Tiannan, Su Chu was just in charge of defense, but he was also famous for his fighting prowess. Beside Su Chu sat a slender woman. She looked to be in her 30s. She had short hair and was charming and beautiful, but also as sharp as a knife. Sitting beside Su Chu, she looked extremely petite, but her aura seemed to completely suppress Su Chu. Among the several young people in Emperor Dong's palace whose future was worth people's expectations, this might be the only one who had really reached the half-step invincible realm, and was only one step away from the combat capability of the invincible realm. There was a complicated look in Yi Dongxing's eyes. Seeing her might remind him of the biggest traitor of the Wang family of Beihai. Now the woman in front of him was no longer as famous as Wang Xiaoyao, but she could still be regarded as a top expert in Emperor Dong's palace, and even in Zhongzhou State. She was the woman who had refused several invitations from Situ Tsangyue and Tribulation. She was the deputy commander of the Praetorian Guard in Emperor Dong's palace, the real leader and the current eldest daughter of the Bai family in Yuzhou by Yuming. She was the daughter of Bai Qingqiao and the niece of Bai Qingqian. She joined Emperor Dong's palace, which in some ways represented the will of the giant group. It could even be said that she was the representative of the giant group here. Ning Qiancheng sat down next to Bai Yuming, a very casual position. In such a big office, without Li Tianlan, there was no such thing as a seat of honor. Next to Ning Qiancheng was the sacred guard of the Li family in Li Honghe's era, Yu Donglai, the famous doctor of poison in the Dark World decades ago. The old master was completely in a state of retirement in Xianyuan City. Even in high-level meetings, he could come and go as he pleased. In recent years, his condition had deteriorated severely. Now he was completely out of the thunder-shocking realm, and could barely exert the strength of the fire-flaming realm. His spirit was not very good, but since he was called the Doctor of Poison, as long as he was alive and sober, everyone would be afraid of his existence. There was no one around Yu Donglai. 3 or 5 seats away, at the end of a whole row of young people, Du Hanin was sitting there alone, silent and looking a little lonely. Now she could be said to be the real first assassin in Emperor Dong's palace. In terms of lethality, she might not be as good as Bai Yuming, but in terms of speed, her destroyed and mutated wind vane gave her an unparalleled advantage. She was a member of Emperor Dong's palace, and also a member of Sai City, or it could be said that she was the representative of Sai City in Emperor Dong's palace. Yi Dongxing had learned about Du Hanin's past. During the difficult time when her wind vane was completely destroyed by someone with hatred, in order to survive in the Sky Academy and keep a glimmer of hope of revenge, this young lady, who used to be a prominent family, sacrificed too many unimaginable things for ordinary people. For example, body. It only took 10 credits to have a night of pleasure with this woman, who came from a prominent family and had the wind vane, and who was extremely outstanding in terms of figure, appearance, and temperament. At that time, Du Hanin was very popular in the entire Sky Academy. No one knew what she had experienced during that time, until she paid a huge price to stay in the academy and met Li Tianlan. Her wind vane was mutating into dual wind vanes. As a student of tribulation, Du Hanin was now second only to Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud in Sai City. She was the elusive first assassin in Emperor Dong's palace. A real assassin seemed to be always alone. She had no friends and was not close to anyone. She always sat alone in a corner, silent and meditating. Yi Dongxing glanced at Du Hanin thoughtfully. No one knew what he thought of. His eyes flickered, and finally he shook his head. The young high-level officials sat in a row. Sitting opposite several young people at the long conference table were Eagle King, Tianin, and other old people of the Li family. Some of them came from the purgatory of Heaven capital. It was a betrayal, but a return. This group of old people only recognized Li Honghe. After Li Honghe died, they only recognized Li Tianlan. It could be said that they were absolutely loyal. Compared with the young people, they were more experienced and steadier, and could cope with all kinds of situations more calmly. The replacement of the old and the new formed the high-level structure of Emperor Dong's palace today. Yi Dongxing saw everything clearly. Although he already had the information of these people in his mind, after seeing them with his own eyes, he could not help but feel a little scared. Lin Yuxian, Li Beitian, Su Chu by Yuming, Ning Qianqing, Du Hanin. What a luxurious lineup! Among these people, except for Ning Qianqing, everyone had the hope of breaking through to the invincible realm. Lin Yuxian and Li Beitian would have no problem breaking through to the invincible realm. The only thing they needed was time. Su Chu, by Yuming, and Du Hanin might not be as good, but everyone's future goal was at least the peak of the invincible realm. And Li Tianlan. And Dongqing Rushi, who was still in a coma. If Tribulation, who was seriously injured, and Situt Songyue, Yi Dongxing's mouth could not help but twitch. He suddenly found that although Emperor Dong's palace still needed time, so far, it had grown to a point where everyone had to face it seriously. For the current Wang family of Beihai, without Wang Tianzong, Emperor Dong's palace was qualified to be the opponent of the Wang family of Beihai. And Emperor Dong's palace was still growing and strengthening. Their leader was very young, and so was the new generation of high-level officials. Moreover, they had the absolute cohesion and strong aggressiveness common to new forces. As long as Li Tianlan was still there, as long as Emperor Dong's palace was still there was no need to care whether Emperor Dong's palace was the most powerful or not. Because as long as it was there, it would continuously attract all kinds of talents to take root in Xianyuan City. The new city plan of Emperor Dong's palace would include the entire Xianyuan City, and turn Tiannan into a province with it as the core. The scene in front of him was like hundreds of years ago when Beihai was just established. It was a feeling of blood boiling. It was a feeling that the future was really in his hands, and he could try to control it. Fairy Tale pulled over a chair and sat down casually. Yi Dongxing sat down slowly. After a long silence, he laughed and said, "I'm full of emotions." There was obvious sigh and emotion in his voice. Everyone sitting in front of him right now, if they were fated to meet again in a few years, perhaps they would be in a different attitude. General Yi, Emperor Dong's palace doesn't pay attention to formalities. Let's cut to the chase. What can I do for you this time? Please tell me directly. Li Beitian looked at his colleagues around him. Seeing that they didn't mean to speak, he directly set the topic. He was a swordsman, not a politician. He was most impatient with idle chatter. In fact, the whole atmosphere of Emperor Dong's palace and Xianyuan city was like this. Even Ning Qiancheng, who was in politics, was straightforward in his words and actions. He would not talk nonsense if he could. Yi Dongxing took a deep look at him, nodded and said, "Well, now you should know about the planned termination, right?" There was a moment of silence in the conference room. Everyone subconsciously narrowed their eyes. Li Baiqian's eyes were a little cold. The planned termination. This was the news he just got after talking to Dongqing Wudi on the phone. He didn't expect the game to be so fierce now. Tens of thousands of troops had begun to blockade the desert prison. This was completely escalating the game into a war. Chen Fangqing was really desperate. Li Baiqian didn't know if this was stupid, but he was sure that what Chen Fangqing was doing now was absolutely unwise. If Chen Fangqing were to lose, one could imagine what would happen to him. Even if he were to succeed, it would not be a good thing for Chen Fangqing personally. His term in office was coming to an end. After he retired, it would be difficult for him to maintain a strong influence after this incident. No one was willing to be too close to such a crazy prime minister, even though his craziness was not really selfish. Yi Dongsheng looked at the silent crowd quietly. After a moment of silence, he said softly, "I want to know your attitude." At this time, he didn't have much practical purpose in coming to Tiannan. His main purpose was to demonstrate, not to Xianyuan City, but to the parliament. The exposure of the planned termination was bound to make the relationship between Emperor Dong's palace and Mount Dibing closer. At this time, Yi Dongxing came to Tiannan to formally cooperate with Emperor Dong's palace. The news spread to the parliament. The parliament couldn't be without pressure. In this way, Chen Fangqing might get less support. After all, even if he sent troops to blockade the desert prison, the others in Emperor Dong's palace were not dead. "What do you think, General Yi?" Bai Yuming suddenly asked. Yi Dongsheng was stunned. He looked at Bai Yuming and said slowly, "The war is coming." Bai Yuming narrowed her eyes. Before she spoke, Yi Dongsheng continued, "The Prime Minister has ordered the Beijiang army to blockade the desert prison. If I'm not wrong, the special envoy of the parliament should be on his way to Xianyuan City. Is this a threat?" Ning Qiancheng raised his eyebrows. "What else?" Yi Dongxing said blandly. "The Prime Minister's plan is crazy and bold, but it is really effective. They have blocked the prison. In a short time, it is difficult for us to contact His Highness. The Prime Minister not only wants to prevent His Highness from knowing about the planned termination, but also to warn Emperor Dong's palace. Now that His Highness is blocked by the army, if Emperor Dong's palace wants to cooperate with Beihai, it will be an enemy. When the war breaks out, they will not show mercy to the enemy. Emperor Dong's palace and Emperor Dong's palace will be sacrificed. This is probably what the special envoy means. If you continue to cooperate with Beihai, they will not guarantee the safety of Emperor Dong's palace, Xianyuan City, and His Highness." A strange look flashed across Li Baiqian's eyes. He chuckled and said, "General Yi, you are more like the special envoy of the parliament now." "Haha." Yi Dongxing laughed. "Anyway, it's just a set of words. I just want to know the attitude of Emperor Dong's palace. I have told you the special envoy's threat. Do you have any concerns? You should ask if Zhongzhou State has any concerns." Eagle King's old voice rang out. "Does he dare to destroy Emperor Dong's palace and young master?" "He doesn't dare," Yi Dongxing said with certainty. "Even if he dares, he can't do it." Su Chu scratched his big head and said in a muffled voice, "What did Minister Dongqing say?" He was not asking Yi Dongsheng but Li Baiqian. Li Baiqian hesitated and shook his head. "The minister just informed me of the planned termination and the blockade of the Beijiang army." He said nothing else. Everyone was stunned. There were many meanings of nothing. Or it could mean nothing at all. Was it because Dongqing Wudi was not sure about the current situation? Or it was because Dongqing Wudi could not make a decision for Emperor Dong's palace. Did the Wang family of Beihai do anything? Li Baiqian suddenly asked. Yuetong is Sheng Xiao's sister, and one of the core members of Beihai. Although she has some conflicts with her family now, this identity will not change. Whoever attacks the core members of Beihai must be prepared for Beihai's revenge. This is Beihai's bottom line. No one can touch it. Beihai will not compromise, and it is impossible to compromise. Last night, Beihai killed 4 major generals of Zhongzhou state lurking in Beihai and hundreds of all kinds of elite intelligence personnel, Yi Dongsheng said blandly. At the same time, Beihai will send a team of experts to break through the defense line of the Beijiang army and try to get in touch with His Highness Li Tianlan. This plan may be fast or slow. Before that, we hope to know the attitude of Emperor Dong's palace. When Emperor Dong's palace loses contact with His Highness Li Tianlan, facing the planned termination, will you compromise or fight back? Everyone quickly glanced at each other. In fact, there was no need for hesitation or discussion. Before Yi Dongsheng arrived, they had made a clear decision. Let me correct your words, General Yi. Ning Qianqing said slowly. Yuetong is indeed the palace master of the Wang family of Beihai, but she has left Beihai. Now she is the hostess of Emperor Dong's palace. It's just a temporary misunderstanding with Tianlan. Their relationship will not change. Yi Dongsheng raised his eyebrows, and the smile in his eyes was hard to read. Even if Emperor Dong's palace loses contact with Tianlan temporarily, Emperor Dong's palace is still Tianlan's palace. The hostess of Emperor Dong's palace is the target of planned termination. If we don't fight back but retreat, what's the point of Emperor Dong's palace? Ning Qianqing continued. So, Yi Dongsheng smiled and was satisfied. Mayor Ning, what do you mean? I will go to Beihai right away. Ning Qianqing did not speak. Du Hanin's cold voice sounded directly. She stood up from her seat, and her exquisite figure looked very proud under the light. The first batch of elites of Emperor Dong's palace will arrive in Beihai this evening. We need a camp. Yi Dongsheng was stunned for a while, then nodded and said with a smile, no problem. His body relaxed, and he looked very relaxed. General Yi, you just said you wanted to say 2 things? Ning Qianqing glanced at Du Hanin, then turned to look at Yi Dongsheng. Yi Dongsheng nodded. Second, His Highness was imprisoned in the desert prison because of Qi Mulan. Whether Qi Mulan committed treason has not been confirmed for a long time. The task force is already investigating. We will use all means to provide evidence of Qi Mulan's treason. In this way, His Highness will be innocent, and the Prime Minister's imprisonment of His Highness will be even more unreasonable. Yu Li Beitian frowned. Yi Dongsheng said this sentence very calmly. However, he smelled a hint of true danger from it. I've already said it. We're going to fight back. Yi Dongsheng said lightly. Li Beitian was slightly shocked and said softly, you have a big plan. We are just cooperating with each other for mutual benefit. If this plan succeeds, you will also gain a lot. Yi Dongsheng said. What's your attitude in the desert? I'll go there. Tianyin, who had been sitting next to Eagle King, said slowly. He returned to Emperor Dong's palace from the Purgatory of Heaven capital, as soon as Xianyuan City was established. Purgatory of Heaven capital. Emperor Dong's palace. It was no longer the Li family, but the young master of the Li family, who deserved his loyalty, was still there. I can go there. Tianyin said slowly. If I can succeed, it will be the best. If I fail, after all, I came from the Purgatory of Heaven capital. You can also put the blame on the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Zhongzhou state won't believe it, but at least there will be a buffer. Chen Fangqing sealed the prison, which is equivalent to imprisoning Tianlan. When he did this, he didn't take Emperor Dong's palace seriously at all. Now we don't need any leeway. Lin Yuxian, who had been silent, suddenly said with a blank expression. General Lin, what do you mean? Yi Dongsheng's eyes flashed, with a tentative look. Lin Yuxian smiled lightly and said quietly, I'll go. Everyone was stunned for a moment. Lin Yuxian's calm voice sounded again, but it was like thunder in everyone's ears. Not only me, but the Nightmare Army will also go north with me. There are more than 40,000 troops, and there are invincible realm experts in charge. It's difficult to break through their blockade if there are fewer people. I'll lead the Nightmare Army directly to break through them. Everyone's spirits were lifted. It was not shock. It was excitement. Lin Yuxian had always been low-key and gentle in Emperor Dong's palace. No one expected him to be so tough. Break through them. This sentence was really refreshing. Nightmare Army, Yi Dongxing muttered. And Xianyuan sword. Lin Fengting's voice was soft and indifferent. When he mentioned Xianyuan sword, he sounded like he was talking about an ordinary army instead of the ultimate army of the Lin clan. Don't forget, in addition to Chen Fangqing sealing Tianlan, the patriarch of the Lin clan is still with Tianlan. I'm a branch of the Lin clan. When I learned that the patriarch was trapped, I went to pick him up. Isn't it reasonable? Lin Yuxian said softly. I just don't know if the prime minister is ready to be the enemy of the Lin clan. He gently knocked on the conference table and looked at Chen Fangqing. Arrange for the Nightmare Army and Xianyuan sword to enter the country. Is there a problem? When? Yi Dongxing asked directly. Lin Yuxian yawned and said lightly, let's do it tonight. Yi Dongxing nodded. Before he said anything, a secretary suddenly walked to Fairy Tale, and whispered something in his ear. Fairy Tale frowned slightly, and his expression looked a little strange. What's the matter? Lin Yuxian asked. Ha, Fairy Tale smiled. General Yi is a prophet. The special envoy of Zhongzhou State has arrived. Where is he? Lin Yuxian was stunned. Outside the door. Fairy Tale shrugged. Shall we let him in? Outside the door. Li Beitian subconsciously raised his voice and then sneered. He's really overbearing. Even if Yi Dongxing entered Xianyuan City, he would inform the City Hall or Emperor Dong's palace when he approached Xianyuan City. This was the most basic etiquette. However, this so-called special envoy came directly to the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace, and even deliberately avoided detection in Xianyuan City. Before they met, the overbearing feeling of victory had already hit them in the face. Li Beitian narrowed his eyes and smiled coldly. Let's go and have a look. Yi Dongxing also stood up. Everyone left the conference room at the same time, and entered the elevator. The elevator went all the way down and finally stopped on the first floor. The elevator door slowly opened. An extremely arrogant voice directly passed through the huge hall, and faintly came over. Go away, who do you think you are? What do you think this place is? I'm standing here on behalf of the Zhongzhou State Parliament. Why? When did Emperor Dong's palace break away from the sequence of Zhongzhou State? I represent Zhongzhou State, and I can go anywhere in Zhongzhou State. You and you. Is no one in Emperor Dong's palace clear of their identity? I don't care what meeting they have. Let the person in charge here come to see me now, right now. The voice sounded indistinct, but since it could pass through the huge hall and still reach everyone's ears, one could imagine how loud the voice was. Hey, it sounds like Chihi. Yi Dongxing suddenly laughed. Chihi. Li Beitian was stunned. Why didn't he go to Sun and Noon? Why did he come here? Sun and Noon is Chuhi. Chuhi, you idiot. Ning Qianqing couldn't help but complain. Ah. Li Beitian laughed carelessly. I know. I'm just kidding. Chihi, I've heard of him. He's a mad dog in the southwest. I heard that he even talked back to Marshal Yi. Not only me, but also Minister Dongqing and Minister Qi Beizong. He talked back to him. Yi Dongxing said with a smile. Li Beitian shook his head. Listening to the endless roars, his eyes grew colder and colder. The so-called mad dog in the southwest had its own story. Chihi was the deputy chief of staff of the Southwest Military Region. His military rank was not high, but he was a major general. But he could be said to be a direct descendant of the Prince Group. He had directly talked back to many members of parliament, and even magnates many times. If anyone offended the interests of the Prince Group in the military, they would usually send Chihi to bite him. Chihi had his own wisdom and was not afraid of trouble at all. But every time he spoke for the interests of the Prince Group, so the Prince Group would definitely protect him. With his character, it was impossible for him to be promoted, but he could keep this position for a lifetime. Now the Prince Group sent Chihi here. Judging from his arrogance, it was likely that they sent him to bite someone again. Tut, a mad dog in the southwest. Li Beitian chuckled. He looked at Du Hanin, who was standing in the front, and suddenly asked, Sister Du, what should we do if he is bitten by a mad dog? Of course, hit him back. Du Hanin said without hesitation. Hit him back. Well, hit him back. Oh, hit him back, Li Beitian muttered to himself as he walked forward. Is it too easy for him? Tut, too easy for him. In the hall, Chihi's roar grew louder and louder, as if he wanted to flip the ceiling of the castle. In the dense sound of footsteps, Li Beitian and the others came directly to Chihi. Chihi was stunned. His eyes rolled and flickered. Finally, he stopped roaring. He must have remembered his duty here. Are you looking for the person in charge of Emperor Dong's palace? Li Beitian tilted his head. Chihi narrowed his eyes and asked rudely, Are you the person? No, I'm not. Li Beitian laughed. The real person in charge is in the desert. As for here, each of us can be regarded as the person in charge. What do you want to say? Don't be so cheeky. Chihi's face darkened and said coldly, I know who your person in charge is. This time I'm here to talk to you about this matter. Li Tianlan is involved in treason, and is now under investigation. As his force, Emperor Dong's palace is also a big suspect. The investigation team will come soon. During this time, I advise you to behave and don't act rashly otherwise. Otherwise what? Li Beitian gave him a playful smile. Young man, I think you still don't know the seriousness of the matter. Chihi sneered. Do you know why I'm here? I know. Li Beitian nodded. Aren't you here to threaten us? Naive. Threaten? The parliament never makes unnecessary threats. Li Beitian suddenly waved his hand and interrupted Chihi. We don't make unnecessary threats. So, do you mean the parliament wants a war? Chihi suddenly felt something was wrong. He was a mad dog but not a stupid dog. Since he could be so arrogant, he naturally had his own plans and was confident that he could calm down the atmosphere. However, he had just met Li Beitian, so he had to show his toughness so that they could have a chance to talk later. Moreover, since Li Beitian had changed the topic to this extent, how could he retreat? You don't know what's good for you. Chihi sneered. Zhongzhou State is giving you a choice. Don't be so shameless. If you want a war, the parliament can certainly give you a war. He stared at Li Beitian. He was thinking about how to say it to ease the atmosphere. It should be enough for him to be so tough. Even if he didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, he should know the determination and strength of Zhongzhou State. While he was thinking, Li Beitian's voice rang in his ears. Oh, then a war it is, he said casually. Du Hanin seemed to feel a little bored. She walked to the door with her long legs. What? He couldn't believe it. He seemed to think he had heard it. Then a war it is. Right. What did it mean? What the hell did it mean? Are you talking about a? Chihi roared again with a red face. But Li Beitian didn't let him finish. He waved his hand and said casually, Kill him. Swish. Chihi's roar was still echoing. Du Hanin, who passed by him, waved her hand. A sharp and thin wind blade was pulled out of the small space in an instant. The invisible wind blade suddenly cut through Chihi's body. Blood suddenly burst out. Chihi's whole body was cut into 2 pieces. His eyes were wide open, and his expression was filled with fear. Then his eyes quickly dimmed. Du Hanin, covered in blood, walked to the door and said, Take him away. Some of the nearby imperial guards who could no longer hold themselves back rushed forward, casually carrying Chihi's corpse as they walked out. I say. Ning Qianqing looked at the blood on the ground and felt a little annoyed. Is it necessary for so many people to carry a body? Someone come and clean the ground. In any case, nothing can happen to Li Tianlan. Otherwise, you and I can't afford this responsibility. Yuzhou Hidden Dragon Sea. The sun was shining in the winter afternoon. In the quaint office, Li Huaqing turned to look at Chen Fangqing, who was sitting on the sofa, and said very clearly, I know. Chen Fangqing took a big drag on his cigarette and said in a dull voice, He didn't sleep well last night. After getting up, he was busy making arrangements everywhere. Until now, his eyes were bloodshot. But he didn't intend to rest at all. He was still holding on. I still say the same thing. I don't think you're right to block the desert prison. It's too easy to escalate the conflict. Li Huaqing waved his hand impatiently. Chen Fangqing was busy, and Li Huaqing was not idle either. Things changed too fast. Overnight, no one expected the situation to escalate to this point. Strictly speaking, the plan termination itself is too intense. Li Huaqing tried to restrain himself, but in the end he couldn't help but blurt it out. He knew very well that what had already happened. Saying it again would only make people angrier. With his mentality, he shouldn't have said such things, but at this time he couldn't help it. He was already extremely annoyed with plan termination. If it weren't for this plan, things wouldn't have developed to this point of no return. Who was Li Tianlan? Who was Wang Shengxiao? What kind of power was behind these two people? The plan termination directly targeted those who were closely related to these two people. Directly obliterated. What did this mean? When the news spread, it didn't matter whether they were killed or not. For people like Li Tianlan and Wang Shengxiao, as long as you wanted to kill, you deserved to die. Fortunately, the plan termination didn't succeed. Otherwise, at this time, there might be a war in Zhongzhou state. Chen Fangqing couldn't refute. It was true. All this was because of the plan termination, so it was so chaotic. He wouldn't think about what would happen if it succeeded. With failure in front of him, it made no sense to imagine the scenes after success except to temporarily numb himself. I'll take control of the situation. Chen Fangqing took a drag of the cigarette, and his voice became hoarser. I can support you to block the desert prison. Things have come to this point. Even if it's not feasible, we have to try. But I'm against war, and especially against any irreconcilable impulse with Li Tianlan at this stage. Prime Minister, do you understand what I mean? Li Huaqing decided to be more thorough. Chen Fangqing raised his head and looked at Li Huaqing. His eyes were extremely serious. Li Huaqing was also looking at him. His eyes were also extremely serious. What do you mean? Chen Fangqing asked slowly. That's what I mean. What do you want to do? You'd better hurry. I don't think you can trap Li Tianlan for a long time. I believe you don't think so either. 3 days, 5 days, half a month? 1 month is already the limit. I hope that everything can come to a conclusion during this period of time. Otherwise, he circled around the desk a few times and said blandly, You're on your own. Li Tianlan doesn't have the guts. Chen Fangqing suddenly stood up. It seemed that because he was old and didn't have a good rest last night, he used so much strength that it caused a temporary lack of oxygen to the brain. After his whole body shook violently, he sat down again. Li Huaqing's eyelids twitched, but he didn't speak. I heard that he has been practicing martial arts recently. He hasn't shown up in the prison for a long time. Even if he gets out, so what? I have tens of thousands of troops to block the prison. No one can get close to the desert prison. Li Tianlan won't know what's going on outside. Does he dare to attack tens of thousands of troops when he's not sure about the outside information? Does he dare to break out of the blockade? This behavior is tantamount to treason. How can he be so crazy if he doesn't know the termination plan? As long as we don't let the outside news spread, Li Tianlan won't dare to break out in a short time. Within 2 months, I solved Beihai. Why should I be afraid of Li Tianlan? Anyway, Wang Yuetong is not dead. If Beihai is not dead, why should I kill Wang Yuetong? At worst, I'll find Wang Yuetong and ask Li Tianlan for punishment. Chen Fangqing really thought so. He didn't expect to trap Li Tianlan for too long. All his hopes were focused on eliminating the threat of Beihai as soon as possible. As long as Beihai was no longer a threat, Li Tianlan could always find a way to appease it. The most important thing was that Wang Yuetong was not dead. His killing intent might provoke Li Tianlan's hostility, but as long as Wang Yuetong was not really dead, things could still reach a relatively fragile balance. In this way, he would get rid of a tumor for Zhongzhou state, which was a great contribution. What you said is very reasonable. My bottom line is that we can't go to war. Prime Minister, I'm very disappointed with plan termination. He has ruined many of our plans. I can't change that, but I can tell you my bottom line. You'd better grasp the extent of the blockade in Beijing. When Li Tianlan steps out of the desert prison, or when someone breaks through the blockade of the desert, we'll cooperate with each other. Otherwise, our cooperation will end here. He spoke slowly and heavily. This paragraph directly explained everything thoroughly. Chen Fangqing suddenly raised his head. There was anger, viciousness, and madness in his eyes. All previous efforts in vain? Failure on the verge of success. I can't joke about the future of Zhongzhou State or the academics. Li Huaqing suddenly threw a stack of documents on his desk. I have to maintain a stable situation. All games must be played on the bottom line of stability. I have never thought of war. Yes, we can win, but so what if we win? Once this balance is broken, it will bring disaster to Zhongzhou State. All of it, damn it, disaster. Your planned termination exists to break this balance. It's so stupid. If it weren't for the fact that we can't change this situation, our cooperation would have ended by now. He took a deep breath and lit a cigarette. His hand that was holding the cigarette was trembling slightly. Chen Fangqing looked at Li Huaqing in a daze, and did not speak for a long time. He had worked with Li Huaqing for more than 10 years, from the vice president and the deputy prime minister to the president and the prime minister. In all these years he had never seen Li Huaqing so angry, nor had he ever heard him swear. Today was the first time. You'd better solve Beihai quickly. This is the only way for us to continue our cooperation. Otherwise, when Li Tianlan comes out, you can only pray for yourself. Li Huaqing walked to the desk and sat in the chair. He lay on his back with one hand covering his eyes, and the other holding a cigarette. In the smoke he was silent for a long time before he said faintly, "I'm tired." Chen Fangqing took a deep breath, turned around, and strode out of Li Huaqing's office. The sun spread freely in the hidden Dragon Sea. It was soft and fresh. But the cold of winter was everywhere. Chen Fangqing tightened his clothes and looked serious. He only felt that the winter temperature seemed to be cold to the bone. The phone rang. Chen Fangqing walked to the edge of the hidden Dragon Sea, stood under a tree, and answered the phone. "Prime Minister, I have arrived at the blockade front." On the phone, Gu Qianchuan, the acting governor of Kunlun City, said in a steady voice. "Very good. Is there anything going on inside and outside the blockade line?" Chen Fangqing asked. "Not yet." Gu Qianchuan smiled and said calmly, "The prison probably doesn't know the specific situation. They should be discussing countermeasures. It seems that Li Tianlan's closed-door training is correct. The prison is very quiet at present. As for outside the prison, neither Beihai nor Emperor Dong's palace can come here in such a short time. It seems that today's blockade should be relatively successful." Chen Fangqing said and did not speak again. Gu Qianchuan did not speak again. They were silent. Across the phone line, the atmosphere seemed to suddenly become a little awkward. Chen Fangqing naturally knew why. The Prince Group and the newly emerged Special Warfare Group had always been the best buddies. Even from another perspective, when the Li family collapsed and the Southeast Group suffered a great loss, Gu Xingyun took over, and the Special Warfare Group was completely a large group promoted by the Prince Group. However, over the years, the two sides naturally had differences. Gu Xingyun's position was getting more and more stable. Of course, he had his own interests and was unwilling to be a follower of the Prince Group. The relationship between the two sides was gradually drifting apart. But anyway, the cooperation between the two sides was generally pleasant. Some local conflicts did not affect the overall situation at all. When Chen Fangqing faced Gu Xingyun and Gu Qianchuan, he could be natural. But after he and Li Huaqing went to the desert, the relationship between the two sides seemed to have completely changed. There was no impenetrable wall. They wanted to use the entire Kunlun city to exchange for Li Tianlan's loyalty. This kind of news could not be concealed. Chen Fangqing could understand their resentment, but he could not explain this kind of thing at all. Instead, the more he explained, the worse it would be. Now it seemed that he could only use this action to make up for the relationship with Kunlun City. After it was hopeless to win over Li Tianlan, Kunlun City suddenly became important in Chen Fangqing's eyes. Their rise was very short, their foundation was a little weak, their strength was a little weak, and their martial arts inheritance was not the best. But anyway, the two invincible realm experts in Kunlun City were real. The Special Warfare Group could be one of the 6 group, and even vaguely ranked ahead of the North Group. Naturally, it had enough strength to be worth winning over. Qianchuan, you have to work hard during this time. Remember, in any case, the desert must be completely blocked. The people inside can't come out, and the people outside can't go in. It must be completely blocked. Chen Fongqing said in a deep voice. Gu Qianchuan said faintly, "It shouldn't be a big problem, but you should pay more attention to some people in the country." Who? Chen Fongqing frowned. Hidden God Saint. Gu Qianchuan said faintly. Hidden God Situ Tsongyue of Zhongzhou State, Saint Wei Kunlun of Mount Shu. Both of them would stand by Li Tianlan without any consideration. Li Tianlan was the palace master of Emperor Dong's palace and the young governor of Sai City, while Wei Kunlun was the deputy palace master of Emperor Dong's palace. These two invincible realm experts were now injured, but they could still exert a certain combat effectiveness, especially Situ Tsongyue, who was on the divine list. Even if Gu Qianchuan had made great progress in recent years, he felt that he was unlikely to be Situ Tsongyue's opponent without using his trump card. "I'll talk to them." Chen Fongqing rubbed his scalp and said slowly, "Both Situ Tsongyue and Wei Kunlun have things they can't let go of. Zhongzhou State should be able to restrain their actions." "Prime Minister, what I want is not should." Gu Qianchuan smiled faintly. Chen Fongqing snorted and suddenly said, "Your realm should have stabilized now. Qianchuan, I need to know your specific strength." Gu Qianchuan was silent for a long time. Before the chaos in Eastern Europe, among the population of 1.6 billion in Zhongzhou State, there were 5 invincible realm experts. They were Wang Tianzong, Tribulation, Gu Xingyun, Situ Tsongyue, and Gu Qianchuan. Being able to enter the invincible realm was enough to show Gu Qianchuan's talent and luck. However, his potential was almost exhausted when he broke through to the invincible realm. If compared horizontally among the invincible realm experts, his potential was probably the worst. For a long time, he could not even stand on the last position of the holy list. Now he finally stabilized his realm under the polishing of time. If he really attacked with all his strength, Gu Qianchuan did not know how strong he was. So what he could say was just a general idea. "If I don't care about the cost, I can win against Saint, but it's difficult to kill him. If he is seriously injured, so will I. Facing Situ Tsongyue, I'm no match for that woman. But with so many troops to help me, it's not a problem for me to stop her. If the worst happens and 2 invincible realm experts break through here together, unless you allow me to kill one of them, things will be very troublesome." "Kill one of them?" Chen Fongqing was a little stunned. "I can kill one of them. At worst, I can make one of them lose all combat power in an instant and be seriously injured and dying." Gu Qianchuan said silently. "The Prime Minister seems to have forgotten that Setting Sun is currently in my hands." Setting Sun, one of the 12 murderous weapons. It was originally the core trump card of Sai City. However, after Situ Tsongyue fired a shot at Gu Xingyun more than 2 years ago, Setting Sun fell into the hands of Kunlun City. This was a punishment for Situ Tsongyue and compensation for Gu Xingyun. Among the 12 murderous weapons, Setting Sun ranked in the middle. But in terms of power, its power could only be in the middle or lower level. However, Setting Sun's speed of replenishing energy was the fastest among the 12 murderous weapons. Setting Sun was several times faster than Human Emperor, which was the slowest to recharge. In more than 2 years, Setting Sun could barely fire once. In the Battle of the Invincible Realm, as long as Gu Qianchuan found a suitable opportunity, he could completely injure or even kill Situ Tsongyue in an instant. After all, even if he was not Situ Tsongyue's opponent, Situ Tsongyue did not have the strength of Gu Xingyun at that time. She was still injured. If he wanted to find an opportunity, it was easy with the murderous weapon's shooting speed. The possibility of Situ Tsongyue dying under this blow was more than 80%. With the murderous weapon in hand, as long as Chen Fongqing allowed people to die, Gu Qianchuan was 100% sure that he could seal the prison. After all, if his murderous weapon did not strike, its deterrent power would not be less than that of the peak of the invincible realm. It was just that the invincible realm expert of Zhongzhou State took the murderous weapon of Zhongzhou State to kill the invincible realm expert of Zhongzhou State. Was it possible? There was a flash of almost crazy killing intent in Chen Fongqing's eyes. He forcibly suppressed the thoughts in his mind, shook his head, and slowly said, Don't shoot to kill unless it is absolutely necessary. Every invincible realm expert was the most precious treasure of a country, and the most powerful deterrent power of a country. Even in a superpower like Zhongzhou State, invincible realm experts were also very precious. Even if the positions of the groups were different, no one was willing to consume the invincible realm experts in an internal fight, let alone be willing to do so. But at this moment, Chen Fangqing said that it was absolutely necessary. What was absolutely necessary? Chen Fangqing did not give a specific explanation. Gu Qianchuan did not ask either. I'll remind you again, Qianchuan. As if he was afraid that Gu Qianchuan could not understand, Gu Xingyin slowly said, now is the most critical moment. It can even be said that this is a war. Blocking the desert must be carried out to the most thorough extent. No one can enter or leave. No matter who the violator is, no matter how much it costs. He took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, kill without mercy. I see. Gu Qianchuan was silent for a while and said lightly. Chen Fangqing gave a hum and silently hung up the phone. He stood on the edge of the hidden sea and looked at the calm lake. After a long time, he took out his mobile phone again and dialed the number of Saint Wei Kunlun. In the desert of Beijiang, in the temporary station of the 43rd Army, Gu Qianchuan, who hung up the phone, looked at the mobile phone in his hand with a blank expression. After an unknown amount of time, he suddenly began to chuckle coldly. Gu Qianchuan had never been a handsome man. According to the aesthetic standards of normal people, his appearance was even below the ordinary standards. In the past 2 years as the acting city master of Kunlun City, his body looked thinner. He was like a skeleton wrapped in skin standing in the desert. As he sneered, his whole face became distorted. His sunken eye sockets, high protruding cheekbones, and mean lips were twisted. He had an indescribable cruelty and evil. First Elder, a tall and thin man, who looked more like a skeleton than Gu Qianchuan, slowly came over. At the beginning, when Gu Qianchuan was the acting city master, he disliked the title of First Elder very much. He dreamed of the position of city master, and thought for many years before he sat in that position. What he liked most was to be called city master, or even the acting city master. However, in the past 2 years, the dark world was surging. Under the great pressure, Gu Qianchuan had long lost the joy of being city master. He did not care about the title. He was even afraid to hear the title of city master now. Every time he heard these 2 words, he could clearly feel a great pressure. Yes. Gu Qianchuan nodded casually. Looking at the man in front of him, he narrowed his eyes slightly and smiled. Do you know why I brought you here? The man shook his head honestly. The thin man, who seemed to break at a touch, was not the best in Kunlun City. His strength barely reached the thundershocking realm. No matter how bad the foundation of Kunlun City was, it was not difficult to find some people who were stronger than him. However, Gu Qianchuan brought him here. His code name was Spectre. He was the person in charge of all the torture work in Kunlun City. He was also the most cruel and most aggressive psychopath in Kunlun City. He was only in charge of the torture work. Because if nothing unexpected happens, you'll have a lot of new toys in a few days. Undead, I'm very satisfied with you, very satisfied, especially in this kind of situation. Your existence is much more important than anyone else's. Spectre stuck out his tongue and licked his lips. The picture was a little disgusting, but he had an excited expression all over his face. Don't worry, First Elder. He grinned grimly. I will treat every toy in my hands well. Gu Qianchuan nodded with satisfaction. Spectre was indeed a real psychopath. His torture technique was enough to make people feel what was despair and worse than death. And this was exactly what Gu Qianchuan needed. Let's wait and see who will rush out first. Will it be inside or outside? He narrowed his eyes and sat at the door of the desert tent. He was silent, like a fisherman with super patience. It's better for some big shots to come. Gu Qianchuan muttered to himself like a madman or a psychopath. I heard that Qin Weibai is also here. If she comes, well, there is no one here. It should be my toy, not yours. It should be a toy that needs to be carefully protected. If it is someone else, maybe Xiao Mahai is good? There is no one in the desert prison. I don't know when the idiots from Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace will come here. Li Beitian Ning Qiancheng ha, Wang Ling a captive. How long can you play? Spectre trembled all over, and seemed to be very excited. I have some interesting drugs. He smiled. Even if you are skinned and have your tendons pulled, you can at least live a few more days after being injected with this drug. First Elder, if you are interested, I can guarantee that you will have a good time. I hope so. Gu Qianchuan smiled noncommittally. In fact, I want Li Tianlan to come out now. I heard that the 13th flight is not in the desert prison now. If I only deal with Li Tianlan, I am still confident. If he comes out, I will let him try countless ways to die. He had completely stabilized the invincible realm. According to the standards of the last holy and holy lists, Gu Qianchuan was barely qualified to enter the top 10 of the holy list. He had a large number of troops and officers on standby. As long as Li Tianlan dared to appear, Gu Qianchuan was bound to take him down. At that time, the blockade of the entire desert prison would be completely over. Even if Li Tianlan had made great progress in the past year or so, so what? With the murderous weapon in hand, he was not afraid of anything. Moreover, Gu Qianchuan always felt that this spear was not as perfect as Li Tianlan. Whether it was used on Situt Songyue or holy disciple Wei Kunlun, it was far inferior. The possibility of this happening was not high, but under such circumstances, there was still hope to capture several important figures from Emperor Dong's palace and Beihai alive. Gu Qianchuan had made up his mind. No matter who it was, he would let Spectre use the cruelest means to slowly torture them to death. He would skin them and pull out their tendons, hang their bodies on the flag of Zhongzhou state. Gu Qianchuan did not care about the so-called anger and hatred at all. He only knew that he came to the desert this time because of Chen Fangqing's order. Emperor Dong's palace and Beihai hated him, as much as they hated the prince group. In this way, the two sides would be firmly tied together. At least in the plan of the prince group, there was no possibility of letting Li Tianlan replace Kunlun City. 20,000 words should be the longest chapter since I started a book or even wrote a book, that you're tuning into the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.